The locked bathroom stall smelled like gardenias and someone else's perfume. Boom. Claire Hallowell had been sitting on the marble lid of a toilet she hadn't used for 11 minutes. Phone pressed against her sternum, listening to the chandeliers vibrate from the bass line of a wedding band, covering "Can't Help Falling in Love" for the second time. Through the crack in the door, she could see a woman in a seafoam bridesmaid dress, touching up her mascara and not crying about it, which Claire found both impressive and depressing. She needed to leave. Not in the way people say they need to leave parties when they're tired. In the way your body starts sending actual signals, the tight chest, the slight tunnel vision, the sensation that the room has been slowly filling with water, since approximately the moment Audrey said "I do," and their mother grabbed Claire's arm and squeezed twice, which was the signal their mother used when she meant smile harder. She scrolled her contacts for Evan. Evan Mercer. Steady Evan. Evan, who drove a sensible car and remembered to text when he was running late and had never once made her feel like the ground was moving under her feet. She'd dated him for 8 months, ended it gently 4 months ago, for reasons she still couldn't fully articulate, and they'd parted as the kind of almost friends who still had each other's numbers and genuinely meant it when they said we should get coffee sometime. She hit call. It rang once. A man answered. "Who is this?" The voice was low, and even the kind of voice that had learned long ago that volume was for people who weren't actually in control of anything. Claire knew that voice the way you know the sound of a car that almost hit you once, not something you forgot, not something that lost its edge with time. Every cell in her body went cold at once. She had not called Evan. She was looking at the contact name on her screen, and it did not say Evan. It said V. She ended the call. Her hands were completely steady, which she found alarming. A sound like green wood splitting, because internally she was falling through the floor of the Ashford estate, at approximately the speed of a woman who had just made the worst accidental phone call of the last 5 years of her life. Her phone buzzed. "Where are you?" 3 words. No punctuation after the question mark. She stared at them long enough that the screen dimmed. She typed back, "Wrong number, sorry." Blocked the contact. Put the phone in her clutch. Stood up, smoothed the navy blue dress that her mother had selected for her 2 weeks ago with the specific energy of someone staging a crime scene, and walked back out into the reception. The Ashford estate was exactly the kind of venue where a person could feel simultaneously surrounded by people and profoundly alone. 6,000 square feet of restored federal period architecture on the Massachusetts coast, 40 minutes south of Boston, rented for $40,000 for the evening, so that Audrey Hallowell, 28, luminous, a sound Seton, and completely certain she had married correctly, could have the wedding that their mother had been quietly constructing in her mind since Audrey was about 9 years old. There were 300 guests. Claire knew approximately 40 of them and liked about 12. She took a fresh champagne glass from a passing tray, drank half of it while still walking, and found a position near the terrace doors where she could see the room without being required to participate in it. The band had moved on to something slower. Audrey and her husband Daniel were on the dance floor, and they looked exactly as happy as they were supposed to. And Claire felt the guilt of resenting it settle into her shoulders like a second piece of clothing she hadn't consented to wear. She didn't resent Audrey. She needed to be clear about that, at least to herself. She resented the choreography of the whole evening, the way it had been arranged to demonstrate, through 5 hours of canapes and toasts and carefully sequenced emotion, some kind of life was the correct kind of life, and that everyone in this room had either achieved it or was visibly failing to. And Claire, at 32, with her Boston architecture firm job and her Adams Street apartment and her absence of a husband and her absolute lack of explanation for why she'd left the most consuming relationship of her life without. So much as a note Claire was visibly failing to. Her mother appeared at her elbow. "You've barely spoken to the Harrington family." I spoke to them during cocktail hour. For 4 minutes. It felt longer. Her mother's name was Patricia Hallowell, and she was 61 and beautiful in the architectural way of a building that had been maintained with great expense and discipline. She looked at Claire the way she had looked at Claire her entire life, which was with the specific expression of someone who loved you very much and could not understand why you kept choosing to make everything harder than it needed to be. There are 3 men at this reception who are exactly the kind of person you should be meeting, her mother said. Peter Langford is a cardiologist. Marcus Webb just made partner at Mom, I'm just telling you what's there. I know what's there. Claire drank the rest of the champagne. I need some air. She pushed through the terrace doors before her mother could follow. Outside, the Atlantic was dark, and the October wind was doing what October wind does on the Massachusetts coast, which is make everything feel slightly more serious than it actually is. The terrace stretched the length of the back of the house, bordered by stone balustrades strung with lights that had been placed by someone with an eye for the romantic at the expense of the practical, because they swayed every time a gust came through and threw shadows across the stone that moved like something alive. Claire leaned against the railing and let the cold air do its work. She was drunker than she'd calculated, which was a problem she'd created by using champagne as a social lubricant for the past 3 hours, and not eating enough of the past appetizers because she'd been too busy nodding thoughtfully at people discussing soon kitchen renovations. The cold helped. The dark helped. The absence of the band helped enormously. She should call a car service. Just take an Uber and text Audrey in the morning with a careful lie about having a migraine. She pulled out her phone. She stood there in the swaying lights, slightly drunk, slightly cold, and let herself remember, which she almost never did anymore, because she was good at not doing it by now. 5 years of practice. A new city, new routines. A therapist she'd seen for 14 months, who had helped her understand that what she felt for Vincent Calder did not have to define her. She had not deleted his number. She had never been able to explain that to herself in a way that fully satisfied her. She'd told herself it was a practical decision that having a direct line to a man like Vincent might someday matter for safety reasons. She'd told herself it was laziness. She'd told herself a lot of things. She was still standing there, with her phone in her hand, the Atlantic making the sound the Atlantic makes when it doesn't care about any of your problems, when she heard the tires. Gravel. The long driveway of the Ashford estate was gravel, and when a car moved across it slowly, it made a sound that was distinct from the hired car shuttles that had been pulling up all evening. Those moved quickly and efficiently. Whatever was moving on the other side of the estate's south garden moved like it had nowhere urgent to be and already knew where it was going. Claire turned. The south garden ran alongside the house and connected the back terrace to the front circular drive. Through the ornamental hedgerows, she could see the sweep of headlights moving with deliberate slowness. A black sedan stopped. Not a hired car. Not one of the catering vans. A current Model S-Class with tinted windows and Massachusetts plates she couldn't read from this distance. The rear door opened. The man who stepped out was 41 years old and dressed in a charcoal suit that had been made for him specifically, and he stood in the wash of the estate's entrance lighting with the particular stillness of someone who did not require the room or the occasion to orient himself. He was exactly as she remembered, which was not something she'd ever let herself say out loud before. Vincent Calder looked toward the terrace. He looked directly at her. The distance between them was maybe 60 yards. It felt like 6. She should have gone back inside. That was the only rational response. Back through the terrace doors, back into the noise, and the band, and the 300 guests, back to her mother, and the cardiologist, and the partner at whatever firm, back to the entire scaffolding of the life she'd built that was normal and quiet and safe, and did not include standing on a dark Massachusetts terrace, watching Vincent Calder walk toward her with a single bodyguard, maintaining a respectful and completely strategic distance 10 paces behind. She didn't go back inside. She gripped the stone railing and she stood there because her legs had apparently already made the decision for her. He stopped at the base of the terrace steps, 8 feet away. Not touching, not threatening, just present in the way that Vincent Calder was always present completely, deliberately, without accident. Claire, he said, just that. Just her name, the same way he'd always said it, like it was a full sentence. You need to leave, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. Right now. You need to get back in that car and leave. You called me. I called the wrong number. I was looking for someone else. She heard how that sounded the moment it was out. I dialed by mistake. That's all it was. He looked at her for a moment. You kept my number. I never got around to deleting it. For 5 years, people don't always clean out their contacts. You cleaned out everything else. There was no accusation in it. That was almost worse. Just the flat, quiet observation of a man stating something he had clearly already thought about more than once. Your apartment on Beacon Street. The gallery opening you were supposed to attend. The dinner reservation I didn't cancel for 3 days because I kept thinking you'd come back. The wind moved the lights above the terrace, and the shadows crossed his face, and he looked exactly like the thing she had spent 5 years teaching herself she didn't miss. I'm at my sister's wedding, Claire said. I want you to understand what you showing up here means. There are 300 people inside. My family is inside. My mother is inside. I understand that. Then why are you here? He said it without hesitation. Because you were frightened. The terrace doors burst open. Audrey had clearly been inside for approximately 30 seconds before she'd been informed by someone that there was a man in the driveway who didn't belong to the guest list. And Audrey processed information about uninvited guests with the speed and efficiency of someone who had planned this event for 11 months and would be damned if the last hour of it went sideways. She was still in her dress. The dress silk charmeuse with a cathedral train that she'd somehow navigated through 600 square feet of cocktail party all evening without incident. And she navigated it now with the focused energy of a woman who had exceeded her limit. What is this? Audrey said. It wasn't a question. It's nothing, Claire said immediately. She called me, Vincent said. Audrey looked at him with the particular expression of a bride at the end of her wedding reception who was being asked to process something she hadn't budgeted emotional energy for. I'm sorry she called you? Wrong number, Claire said. Audrey, this is nothing. I'm handling it. You're handling it, Audrey repeated. On my terrace. On my wedding night. She looked at Vincent with the expression of someone who had not previously known this person existed and was not pleased to be learning about them now. Who are you? No one important, Vincent said, which was precisely the most incorrect thing he could have said, but he said it without irony, and he was looking at Claire when he said it. Inside, behind the glass doors, faces had appeared. Guests. Claire could see her mother's profile. She could see the wedding planner with her earpiece talking to someone urgently. She could see security, the estate's security. 2 men in black jackets who had been positioned near the entrance all evening, moving through the crowd toward the terrace. 20 seconds, maybe 30, before this became the people described at dinner parties for the next 2 years. Audrey. Claire stepped toward her sister and lowered her voice. Give me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. I will handle this, and he will leave, and no one inside needs to know what this was. I promise. Audrey stared at her. 5 minutes, Claire said again. The security team appeared at the terrace doors. Audrey held up one hand to stop them without turning around. She looked at Claire with the expression of a younger sister who had, over the course of 30 years, accumulated a very specific kind of patience for her older sister's complications. 5 minutes, Audrey said. And then I am calling the police myself. She stepped back inside. The doors closed. The security team remained visible through the glass watching. 5 minutes. You're going to leave, Claire said. She turned back to Vincent. I'm going to tell you to your face that the call was an accident, and you're going to get in that car and you're going to leave. Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay? If you look me in the eye right now and tell me you want me to leave, I'll leave. He was completely still. The bodyguard 10 paces back was completely still. The whole estate had gone strangely quiet under the wind. That's all I need. She looked him in the eye. She opened her mouth. The words were completely clear in her mind. Leave. I want you to leave. 4 words, 2 of them repeated, and she had said harder things to harder people, and she was good at this by now. She said nothing. He waited. He was extraordinarily patient. He'd always been extraordinarily patient, which had once seemed like a virtue and had later seemed like a quality that belonged in a different category of virtue altogether. Why did you keep it? He said softly. 5 years. You kept one letter in your contacts. Just one. Why didn't you delete it? I don't know. Yes, you do. The wind came through again. Inside, the band had started another song. The shadows crossed the terrace. Her sister was watching through the glass. If I go back inside, Claire said, you'll actually leave? I'll actually leave. She needed to say yes. The rational, functional, life-preserving answer was yes. She had a career. She had a sister who'd just gotten married. She had a mother inside who was already watching from the window with an expression that Claire would spend approximately 4 days unpacking if she went back in there now. Then Audrey started pounding on the terrace door glass, and the sound was sharp and urgent, and Claire's body made the decision before her brain caught up with the memo. "Where's the car?" she said. The bodyguard, a quiet man in his 50s named Hartley, who had been with Vincent for years and had learned through professional experience not to register surprise at anything, held the sedan door open. Claire got in. She sat in the back seat of a car she had no business being in a navy blue dress selected by her mother at her sister's wedding, and she listened to the gravel under the tires as Vincent got in beside her and the estate lights disappeared behind the hedgerows. "I have my purse," she said to no one in particular. "That's good," Vincent said. "I don't have my coat. We have heat." She looked straight ahead through the partition glass at the road, unspooling in the headlights. "I need you to understand that this isn't. I'm not doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because my sister has 300 people inside, and if I stay on that terrace another 10 minutes, it becomes a scene that she deserves not to have at her wedding. I understand. This is logistics. Not a decision." Vincent said nothing. She looked at him. He was looking out his window at the dark Massachusetts coastline, and his face in profile was exactly the face she'd spent 5 years teaching herself to forget and had failed at. Specifically, every time something went wrong, and she needed to be reminded what it felt like to be completely certain about a person before you discovered what that certainty was built on. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." The car turned south toward the water. The house was glass and stone, and it sat on a granite shelf above the Atlantic, with the particular arrogance of architecture designed to look inevitable. Claire had been here once before, 5 years ago, before she'd understood what she was walking into. She remembered the way the ocean sounded from every room, relentless, continuous, not comforting the way people described ocean sounds when they were trying to sell you something, but actual and cold and indifferent. Hartley opened her door. She got out. The wind off the water hit her immediately, and she stood there in the navy blue dress without her coat and let it. Vincent came around the car. "Come inside," he said. In a minute he waited. She stood at the edge of the granite shelf and looked at the black water and the thin white lines of the waves breaking in the dark below. And she thought about the last time she'd stood in this exact spot, which had been a Tuesday in October 5 years ago, the morning after she'd found the documents in his study that explained, in clean and unambiguous financial language, what Calder Maritime actually was under its public filing. She'd stood here that morning while he slept. She'd looked at the water for a long time. Then she'd gone back inside, gotten her bag, and walked out the front door. She'd never come back. "I need you to tell me why you really came tonight," she said. The wind was loud enough that she had to say it at a volume she'd rather not have used. Vincent stood beside her, close but not touching. "I told you. You told me I sounded frightened. That's the reason." She turned and looked at him directly. "You run a shipping empire and a criminal organization, and you have a team of people whose literal job is your personal security. You don't personally drive to a wedding on the Massachusetts coast because a woman accidentally called you and sounded worried." He held her gaze. "I did tonight." She waited. He looked at the water for a moment. Just briefly, less than 5 seconds. The kind of break in composure that, from Vincent Calder, was equivalent to most people sitting down on the floor. "I've answered 17 phone calls in the last 3 years that I hoped were you," he said. "Not many. Enough." He looked back at her. "When I heard your voice tonight, I was in the middle of a meeting with 3 people whose time costs more per hour than most people make in a month. I walked out of the room. I told Hartley to bring the car." He paused. I'm not telling you that's rational. I'm telling you that's what happened. Claire stood very still. Instinct, he said quietly. Defeated discipline. That's the complete explanation. The Atlantic moved below them, enormous and unimpressed. You should have stayed in your meeting, she said. Probably. She pulled her arms around herself against the cold. I want my own room, she said, and I want to know the Wi-Fi password. And tomorrow morning, I want a full explanation of whatever security situation you've decided justifies me being here. It better be real and specific, not something your people assembled to give you cover. Vincent looked at with something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Hartley will show you the room. I know where the rooms are, she said, and walked toward the house. She heard him follow at a distance that was respectful and completely intentional, and she did not look back, and she went inside, and the door closed behind her. And the sound of the Atlantic followed anyway, through the glass walls of a house designed to let the ocean in, whether you wanted it or not. Between the wedding terrace and this moment, Claire had crossed a line she couldn't see from either side. She was starting to think she'd crossed it the night she put his number in her phone under a single letter and told herself it was practical. She was starting to think she might have crossed it the day she left. The room they gave her had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water and a bed that was too large and sheets that smelled like nothing, which was somehow worse than if they'd smelled like something. Claire sat on the edge of the mattress, in the navy blue dress with her heels still on, and her clutch in her lap, and stared at the black rectangle of ocean beyond the glass, until her eyes stopped focusing properly. She'd been in the house 40 minutes. She had not cried. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She was not the kind of woman who cried in the bedrooms of complicated men she'd fled years ago. She was the kind of woman who sat very still on the edge of a mattress and performed a thorough internal audit of every decision she'd made in the last 4 hours that had led to this specific outcome. The audit was not flattering. She took off her heels, placed them side by side on the floor with more precision than the situation required. Then she stood up and walked to the window and pressed 2 fingers against the glass and felt the cold come through from the other side. The Atlantic was doing what it always did, moving, not caring. There was a knock at the door. It's open, she said, because she had not locked it, which was either a statement of independence or a failure to think clearly, and she wasn't sure which. A woman came in, late 40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing the kind of practical dark clothing that suggested function over everything. She was carrying a folded garment, a sweater, wool, dark green, and a glass of water and a phone charger. Mr. Calder asked me to bring these, she said. My name is Rosa. If you need anything tonight, you can use the house intercom. Number 4. Rosa, Claire said. Is there a car I could call from here? A car service? An Uber zone that works in this area? Rosa set the items on the dresser. The nearest pickup point with reliable service is about 12 miles. That's not an answer to my question. Rosa looked at her with the expression of a woman who had worked for Vincent Calder long enough to have developed a specific kind of empathy for people in Claire's situation. I can make a call for you if you'd like me to. Yes. Please, I'll need to let Mr. Calder know. Claire turned fully from the window. Why? It's a security protocol. Anyone leaving the property. I'm not his employee. No, Rosa said simply, you're not. The silence lasted about 4 seconds, which was enough for both of them to understand the precise dimensions of the problem. Fine, Claire said. Tell him I want to speak to him. He came 20 minutes later, which was long enough that she'd changed out of the dress Rosa had produced without being asked, a set of folded clothes that had clearly never been worn, tags still attached, approximate size correct, and was sitting in an armchair by the window in clean jeans and the dark green sweater when he knocked. Come in, she said. He was still in the charcoal suit. He'd taken off the jacket and the tie. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm in the way she remembered, which she immediately decided not to think about. He sat down in the chair across from her, without being invited, which was also something she remembered. I want to go home, she said. I know. Then tell Hartley to take me. I can't do that tonight. You can. You're choosing not to. Vincent leaned forward, elbows on knees. There's a man who works for Dominic Vescari. Do you know that name? No. He runs the waterfront operation between Providence and Portland. He and I have been in a territorial dispute for about 14 months. His people have been watching my movements. He paused. I appeared at a public venue tonight, personally, which I don't do. His surveillance picked it up within the hour. And they saw who I came for. The room went quiet except for the ocean. I'm being watched because of you, Claire said flatly. You're being watched because of me, he corrected. That's different, is it? Yes. He held her gaze. If I'd stayed in my meeting tonight, you'd have gone home from the wedding, and no one would have looked at you twice. Because I came, because they saw me walk across that estate to find you specifically, now they have a question. Who is she? Why does Calder break a meeting and drive 40 minutes for her? What does she know? What can she tell us? He said it without drama, as simple as reading a list. Those are the questions Vescari's people are asking tonight. Claire looked at him for a long moment. So, by coming to protect me, she said, you created the situation I need protection from. He didn't flinch. And you want me to feel better about that. I want you to understand it. I understand it perfectly. She stood up. The armchair scraped the floor. I understand that you made a unilateral decision to appear at my sister's wedding based on a misdialed phone call, and that decision has now apparently made it impossible for me to go home. And you're explaining this to me like I should be grateful for the information. She stopped herself. Breathed. How long? 2-3 days. My people are running surveillance on Vescari's network. Once we know whether they've identified you specifically. 2 or 3 days. Maybe less. Vincent, she said his name the way you say something you've been avoiding saying. I have a job. I have a firm. I have a meeting on Monday with a client who's investing $4 million on a waterfront renovation and who will go to someone else if I'm not in the room. I can have someone call your office. You can have someone. She stopped again. Pressed her hand flat against her sternum. You don't get to call my office. You don't get to have someone manage my life while you manage your security situation. That is not a thing you get to do. Claire, I'm not finished. Her voice was completely level, which cost her something. You walked out of a meeting and drove to a wedding because you heard something in my voice. I understand that. I understand it in a way I probably shouldn't. But whatever that was, whatever that moment was for you, it does not transfer into the right to decide where I sleep and who speaks to my employer and when I'm allowed to go home. Those are not the same thing. Vincent was silent. Tell me I'm wrong, she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, the security situation is real. I didn't ask about the security situation. He looked at her steadily. No, he said. You're not wrong. She hadn't expected him to say that. She'd expected him to redirect, to qualify, to perform the particular kind of masculine reasonableness that was actually just obstruction wearing a calmer face. The directness of it stopped her. Then let me go home, she said. I can't. He said it the same way he'd said you're not wrong without padding. Not because I'm choosing possession over your autonomy. Because the risk is genuine, and I won't pretend otherwise to make you feel better. He stood up. They were the same height, almost, close to it, and the room was small enough that standing meant they were closer than either of them had been in 5 years. 2 days. I'll have a full briefing from my security team in the morning. If the threat assessment is lower than I believe it is, I'll take you home myself. And if it isn't, then we negotiate. We negotiate, she repeated. You tell me what you need. I tell you what I can provide. We find the version that works. She stared at him. You have a remarkable ability to make a hostage situation sound like a project management meeting. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite not one. Get some sleep, he said. Rosa will have breakfast ready at 7. He walked to the door. Vincent. He stopped. Didn't turn around immediately, just paused, and she could see the set of his shoulders against the doorframe. If you do anything to my office or my life in the next 24 hours, without asking me first, she said, we won't have anything to negotiate. He turned, looked at her across the room. Understood, he said. He left. She stood in the middle of the room and listened to his footsteps down the corridor until they disappeared. And then she sat back down in the armchair and looked at the ocean, and the ocean continued to not care. And eventually she fell asleep, sitting up, which was not what she'd intended, what was perhaps the most honest thing she'd done all night. Morning came gray and wind-driven, the kind of New England morning that commits fully to its own grimness. Claire was awake before Rosa knocked. She'd woken at 5:30, with her neck aching from the armchair and her mouth tasting like stale champagne, and the particular clarity of mind that arrives after your body has given up on sleep and decided to just get on with things. She'd washed her face, pulled her hair back, and sat at the small desk by the window and made a list on the notepad she found in the drawer. The list had 5 items. Call Dana at the firm. Don't explain. Reschedule Monday. Call Audrey before she calls me. Get a clear timeline from Vincent's people. Identify the exits. Stop thinking about last night. She crossed out the 5th item because writing it down had already violated its own instruction. Breakfast was in a room off the kitchen. Not the formal dining room she remembered from before, a smaller space with a round table and windows that caught the morning light when the clouds moved. Rosa had made eggs and toast, and there was coffee in a heavy ceramic pot and a stack of folders at the opposite end of the table that had not been there when she arrived. She was on her 2nd cup of coffee when Vincent came in. He had clearly slept, which irritated her irrationally. He was in dark trousers and a gray sweater, and he moved through the kitchen like a man fully at home in his own gravity, which he always had, which had always been simultaneously compelling and slightly infuriating. He sat down across from her, not beside her, across. The folders were between them. The briefing I promised, he said, tapping the top folder. My security director's assessment from night through this morning. She reached for it. He didn't move to stop her. She opened it. The language was technical in the specific way of people who were used to writing things down that they'd prefer not to have written down, carefully structured, specific enough to be accurate, and general enough to be deniable. But the content was clear. Vescari's surveillance team had photographed Vincent arriving at the Ashford estate. Facial recognition software, the kind that did not belong to law enforcement, had processed the guest list in the time it took Claire to change into clean jeans. She had been identified not by name initially, but by proximity and pattern. Subject exited with primary target. Voluntary, no coercion observed. Relationship, unconfirmed. She turned the page. By midnight, they had her name. By 2 a.m, they had her employer, her address, in Boston. The basic architecture of her life for the last 5 years. She set the folder down, picked up her coffee, drank it. Okay, she said. Vincent waited. I'm not going to thank you for being right, she said. But I'm also not going to pretend the folder says something different than what it says. She set the cup down. What happens now? My people keep running counter-surveillance on Vescari's network. We wait to see if they escalate from identification to active interest. There's a meaningful difference between we know who she is and we move on her. And if they escalate, they won't. That's not an answer. If they escalate, he said, we have responses that don't require you to be involved. She looked at him across the table. I need my phone. He nodded to Rosa, who was at the counter. Rosa produced Claire's phone from a drawer and brought it over. The screen showed 14 missed calls, 7 from Audrey, 4 from her mother, 2 from her colleague Dana, 1 from a number she didn't immediately recognize. She looked at the unknown number. Evan called, she said, not to anyone in particular. Vincent's expression didn't change. But something in the room did, the way pressure changes before weather. When did he call? Vincent said. Last night, 11:43. She looked up. He probably just heard I left the wedding early and wanted to check in. Probably, Vincent said. Something in the way he said it. What? She said. Nothing, Vincent. Same way as last night. The way that meant don't. He was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time for Vincent Calder to be quiet about something he clearly already knew. We'll talk about Evan later, he said. We'll talk about Evan now. He made her wait 20 minutes while he took a call in the other room, which she found enraging in the precise way of someone who already suspects the 20 minutes are being used to manage how information gets delivered rather than to gather it. She sat at the round table and called Audrey. Audrey answered on the first ring. Where are you? Not a question. An accusation delivered at the decibel level of someone who had been awake since 3 in the morning, deciding exactly how to say this. "I'm safe," Claire said. "I'm sorry about last night." "Sorry." Audrey said the word like she was examining it for structural damage. "You disappeared from my wedding. In a car. With a man that nobody in our family has ever seen before and who showed up at my reception uninvited, and you want to open with sorry." Audrey, mom, is beside herself. Daniel's mother thinks I staged a distraction because Daniel's cousin made a toast that went 7 minutes too long, which I want you to know I did not stage. I would never, she stopped at herself. "Claire, who is that man? Someone I knew before." "Knew day to go." "It's complicated." "How complicated?" Audrey. Claire pressed her thumb against the bridge of her nose. "I'm going to tell you everything. Not right now, because right now is not the right time. But I will tell you everything and you will understand, and I need you to trust me for 48 hours. Silence. 48 hours, Audrey said, maybe less. Another silence, shorter. "Are you in danger?" "No," Claire said. "Then I don't think so." "No." That is not a reassuring sequence of words. "I know. I'm going to need you to call me every 12 hours, Audrey said. "If you miss a call, I'm contacting the police, and I'm not joking about that, Claire. I will absolutely." "Every 12 hours, Claire said. "I promise." She hung up, sat with the phone in her hand. Then she called Dana at the firm and gave her the migraine story. Splitting, which Dana accepted with the resigned efficiency of someone who had been managing Claire's schedule for 3 years and had learned that Claire's personal life occasionally produced unexplained gaps. She rescheduled Monday. She blocked Tuesday morning as a precaution. Vincent came back into the room when she was putting her phone down. He sat. He had a folder in his hand, a different one from the briefing. Smaller. He placed it on the table between them and did not open it. "Tell me about your relationship with Evan Mercer," he said. Claire looked at the folder. "Why does this feel like an interrogation?" "It's not. It feels like one." "I know." He kept his hands flat on the table on either side of the folder. "Tell me anyway." She looked at him for a moment. "We dated for 8 months. I ended it in June. We're not together. We're barely in contact." "How did you meet?" "Work event. An architecture firm happy hour. He was there with someone he knew from college who worked at a competing firm. We talked. He asked for my number." She paused. "He was normal. That was the whole appeal, if I'm being direct about it. He was predictable and kind, and he didn't make me feel like I was standing on the edge of something." Vincent held her gaze with the particular flatness of a man filing information. "What?" she said. He opened the folder. The photographs were printed on standard paper, but the detail was clear enough. Evan at a restaurant she didn't recognize, not in Boston. Somewhere, with different light, somewhere coastal. Evan across a table from 2 men whose faces were partially obscured, but whose body language communicated something that was definitively not a casual lunch. A timestamp in the corner, 8 months ago. The same month she and Evan had started seeing each other regularly. Financial documents next. She was not an accountant, but she had spent enough time reviewing project budgets and contractor invoices to read a spreadsheet. And what these spreadsheets showed was money moving in the specific pattern of money that did not want to be followed. Shell companies. Offshore accounts with routing structures that went through 3 countries before arriving anywhere. Deposits that were too regular to be irregular income and too irregular to be salary. She turned pages. More photographs, a name she didn't recognize, attached to a corporate entity she didn't recognize. And then on the last page, a single annotated line connecting the corporate entity to a parent organization. Vescari Logistics, LLC. She put the page down. Her hands were completely steady again. She noticed that. She'd started noticing it as a warning sign, the steadier her hands. The more her brain had decided to simply hold the information at arm's length until she could figure out what to do with it. "How long have you had this?" she said. "The financial records, about 3 weeks. The photographs longer. How much longer?" He paused. 7 months. She looked up. 7 months. "Yes. You've known for 7 months that the man I was dating was laundering money for your competitor." "I suspected. The confirmation came 3 weeks ago. And you didn't." She stopped. The steadiness in her hands was starting to cost her actual effort. Why didn't you tell me? Because telling you meant contact. And you'd made it clear? Don't. Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. She pulled it back. Don't tell me you stayed away because you were respecting my choices. Not whilst you're sitting there having conducted surveillance of my personal life for 7 months. The surveillance wasn't on your personal life. It was on Evan. I was in Evan's personal life. I know that. So you watched. Yes. She pushed back from the table, stood up, walked to the window. The ocean was iron gray and moving fast under the wind, and she pressed her palm against the glass and let the cold come through. 8 months. She'd spent 8 months finding Evan's normalcy comforting, finding his predictability reassuring, building an argument inside her own chest that the problem with her previous life had been her choices, and that she was now making better ones. And that proof of this was a man who texted when he was running late and remembered how she took her coffee and had once made her feel like the ground was moving. The ground had been moving the entire time. He knew about you, she said. Not a question. Yes, when we met, we believed so. Yes. She kept her hand on the glass. Was any of it real? We don't know. Best guess. Probably some of it, Vincent said. People are complicated. Don't, she turned around. Don't be understanding about this right now. I don't need understanding right now. He said nothing. I need you to be angry about it, she said, which surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Because I'm furious and I don't have anywhere to put it. And the only person in this room who has any idea what it means to be systematically deceived by someone you trusted is you. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, something quieter than that. I'm angry, he said. I've been angry about it for 7 months. She believed him. She looked at the folder on the table. He called last night, I know. You think it's because he found out about me leaving with you. His people, Vescari's people, were watching the estate. They would have reported it. Yes. I think he knows you were with me last night. And he's calling to what? Find out what I know. Or to reassure you. Manage you. Keep you close enough to be useful. He paused. I don't know which. It may be both. She pulled her arms around herself. Not from cold. Nothing yet. We don't say we. He stopped. What do I do? She said again. He looked at her carefully. Right now? Nothing. You don't call him back. You don't confirm you received the call. You give us 48 hours to run the surveillance further and get a cleaner picture of what Vescari's people know. And then we decide together what comes next. She looked at him across the room for a long moment. The wind hit the windows. The ocean moved below. You said decide together, she said. Yes. Last night you said we negotiate. Yes. Both of those things imply that I have agency in this situation. You do. Then I want access to everything your security team has. Not summaries. The actual files. She held his gaze. If this involves my life, I read the primary sources. He was quiet for a moment, then agreed. And I call Audrey every 12 hours. Agreed. And if at any point I determine that the risk to me is lower than you've assessed it, then we discuss it. Then I leave, she said, not we discuss. I leave. He held her gaze for a long time, long enough that she was aware of her own breathing. Agreed, he said. She nodded once, walked back to the table, sat down across from him, reached for the coffee which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. Show me the rest of the files, she said. They spent 4 hours at the table. Rosa brought fresh coffee twice and lunch once, which Claire ate without tasting, and the security director, a man named Braddock, compact and gray-haired, who came in at 10 and set up a laptop and spoke with the careful precision of someone who chose every word like it had. Walked her through the surveillance architecture, the financial mapping, the timeline of Vescari's operations on the New England waterfront. She asked questions, good ones, specific ones, the kind that came from reading every page herself rather than accepting the summary. Braddock answered them, without condescension, which she appreciated. Vincent said very little during this portion, which she also appreciated, because what she needed right now was information and not the particular distraction of his presence in her peripheral vision. By 2 in the afternoon, she had a clearer picture of Evan Mercer than she'd had after 8 months of dating him. It was not a comfortable picture. Evan had been introduced to Vescari's network through a college connection, a former roommate who'd gone sideways in his late 20s and ended up running financial operations for mid-level organized crime in the Providence area. Evan's entry point was accounting work for a shell company, legitimate enough on the surface, illegal enough underneath that once you were in, you stayed in. By the time he met Claire, he'd been laundering money for the Vescari network for almost 2 years. Whether Vescari's people had specifically placed Evan in her path, or whether his interest in her had developed organically after learning who she'd once been connected to, that was still unclear. Braddock said it honestly. The data didn't resolve it. What the data resolved was simpler and worse. By month 3 of their relationship, Evan had confirmed her history with Vincent Calder to his handlers, and his handlers had instructed him to cultivate the relationship as a potential intelligence asset. She'd been a potential intelligence asset. She looked at that line in the file for a long time. Then she closed the file. "Okay," she said to Braddock. "What's your threat assessment for the next 72 hours? Braddock looked at Vincent briefly, not for permission, she thought, but the habitual check of someone accustomed to reading the room before speaking. "Escalating," he said. "Vescari's team has confirmed your identity and your connection to Mr. Calder. We're seeing increased chatter in the network about asset extraction strategies." What does that mean in plain language? It means they're considering whether to approach you directly. The room was very quiet for a moment. "Approach me how?" she said. "Persuasion first. Most likely through Mercer, since he has an established relationship with you." Braddock paused. "If persuasion doesn't work, then what?" "Then leverage." She understood what leverage meant. She didn't need it spelled out. She looked at the closed file on the table and thought about Audrey's wedding and her mother's through the glass doors, and the 300 guests who didn't know anything about any of this. "My sister," she said. Braddock said nothing. "Is my sister in this picture anywhere?" "Not currently," he said. "She's low profile. The connection to you is public record, but thin." "Keep her out of it," Claire said. Not to Braddock. To Vincent. "She stays out of it," Vincent said. No hesitation. She pushed back from the table, stood up, walked to the window again, which she was doing too frequently, which was the physical expression of a mind that needed movement to think. Evan had called last night. She'd been identified. She was connected to Vincent in the eyes of people who considered that connection exploitable. Evan, the man she'd chosen specifically because he was safe, had been working against her the entire time. She had run from Vincent because he was dangerous, and she had run straight into something worse, which was someone who was dangerous and pretending not to be. She turned around. "I want to meet with Evan," she said. The room went still in the specific way of a room where 2 or 3 people all decide simultaneously not to speak. "No," Vincent said. "I'm not asking. Claire, he called me." She said it clearly, making sure each word had enough room. "He will expect me to call back. If I don't, he'll know something is wrong. And if he knows something is wrong, his handlers will know something is wrong, and the leverage situation Braddock just described becomes more pressing, not less." She looked at Braddock. "Tell me I'm wrong." Braddock had the expression of a man who found himself in the precise center of a conversation he had not been paid enough to navigate. "The logic isn't wrong," he said carefully. "The logic isn't the only variable," Vincent said. "I know that," she held his gaze. "I'm not proposing walking into a room with Evan alone and unprotected. I'm proposing a controlled meeting where your people have visibility and I have a clear exit. I go in. I let him tell me whatever story he's going to tell me. I get out. You gain intelligence on what Vescari's network currently believes about my relationship with you. And if he knows more than we think he knows, then we find out faster than we would, waiting for his people to make the next move." Vincent looked at her with a particular expression she remembered from 5 years ago, the one that meant he was running the calculus at speed and didn't like where it was landing. "You're talking about using yourself as bait," he said. "I'm talking about controlling a variable," she said. "There's a difference. Not much of one. Enough of one." The wind hit the windows. Below, the Atlantic moved the way it always moved, without concern for any of them. "I need to think about it," Vincent said. "You have until tonight," she said. "'Cause tomorrow morning, I'm calling him back regardless." She walked out of the room before he could answer, down the corridor toward the bedroom at the end, and she closed the door behind her with exactly enough force to make the point without making a scene. And she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She had spent 5 years building a life designed to feel safe. She had spent 8 months trusting a man whose job had been to make her feel safe while he watched the exits. She had spent one night back in Vincent Calder's world, and she already knew more true things about her life than she had at her sister's wedding 24 hours ago. She looked at her phone. Evan's missed call sat at the top of the screen like a question she'd been given all the wrong context to answer. She set the phone face down on the mattress. She lay back and looked at the ceiling and listened to the ocean come through the walls of a glass house that had been built to let everything in. And she understood. A sound with the particular clarity of someone who has finally run out of directions to run, that the meeting with Evan was going to happen whether Vincent agreed to it or not. The only question was whether she'd have backup when it did. A sound like Green didn't. Vincent came to her door at 7 that evening. She heard him knock, and she was already awake, already dressed, sitting at the desk with the secondary files Braddock had left her, the deeper financial mapping. A sound like Greenwood splitting, the corporate entity chains that connected Vescari's shell companies across 4 states, and she'd been reading them for 2 hours with the focused attention of someone converting panic into something that could be used. "Come in," she said. He opened the door and stayed in the doorframe. He'd changed into something darker, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee, which was either a peace offering or a tactical decision. And with Vincent, she'd learned long ago that those 2 categories were not mutually exclusive. "We need to talk about tomorrow," he said. "I told you my position." "I know your position." He came in, set 1 cup on the desk beside her files. "Didn't sit. I've been talking to Braddock for the last 3 hours." She looked up, "And your logic holds." He said it like it cost him something. "Controlled contact with Mercer gives us a read on what Vescari's network believes they have. If we wait for them to move first, we lose the initiative." "So you agree?" "I agree with the logic. I don't agree with the risk level." "The risk level is mine, too." "I know." He stopped her. Not with his voice, with the way he said it. Flat and final, like a door closing. "I know it's yours. I'm not here to renegotiate that." He pulled the chair from beside the window and sat down across from the desk, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "I'm here to tell you how we do it if we do it." She picked up the coffee. It was still hot. Talk. The plan took 40 minutes to lay out and another 20 to argue through. Braddock joined them by phone, his voice flat and procedural through the speaker she'd placed between them on the desk. Between the 3 of them, they built a structure that was as controlled as a meeting with a man who was actively working for organized crime could possibly be. The location would be chosen by Claire somewhere familiar, somewhere with multiple exits, somewhere public enough that violence was impractical. She would reach out to Evan in the morning, keep it casual, let him believe he was the one managing the contact. She'd wear a wire, not a visible one, Braddock specified. Something Rosa would help her with. 2 of Vincent's people would be positioned outside. Federal investigators, who had been building a case against Vescari's organization for 14 months independent of anything Vincent's team was doing, would be anonymously tipped with a portion of the financial documentation. That last part was Vincent's addition. She'd looked at him when Braddock said it. "You're giving evidence to federal investigators," she said. "A portion of it. Enough to make them interested in Vescari's waterfront operations. Not enough to raise questions about mine. That's a very narrow line. I've been walking narrow lines my entire adult life." She looked at him for a moment. "And the investigators won't know the tip came from you. They'll suspect. They won't be able to prove it." He held her gaze. "This isn't altruism. It gives Vescari a problem to deal with that isn't you. It reduces the operational window where you're a useful asset to them. It also reduces the operational window where they can hurt you through me." Yes. She appreciated that he didn't pretend otherwise. "Okay," she said. Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Braddock confirmed through the phone. "I'll have the team in position by 9. He clicked off. The room went quiet. Outside the windows, the ocean was doing its nighttime thing, which was be dark and loud and indifferent, to everything happening inside the house. Vincent didn't move to leave immediately. He sat with the empty coffee cup in his hand and looked at the files spread across the desk, and she watched him do it. 8 months, she said. He looked up. You watched this for 7 months and didn't tell me. She wasn't accusing. She was trying to understand. You let me stay in a relationship with a man who was using me, and you stayed away because you'd made it clear you wanted me to. I made it clear 5 years ago. 5 years ago is the last instruction I had. She looked at him. The lamp on the desk was the only light in the room, and it put everything in the kind of contrast that makes ordinary faces look like they mean something. You should have told me, she said. I know. 7 months ago. The moment you had confirmation, you should have found a way. You're right. He said it without defensive scaffolding. Just said it. I was wrong. She hadn't expected that either. She was going to have to stop expecting not to be surprised by him. Go to sleep, she said. We both need to be functional tomorrow. He stood, picked up his cup, walked to the door. Vincent. Same place as before, same door frame, same dark hallway behind him. He waited. If something goes wrong tomorrow, she said, I need you to stay outside. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like. She held his gaze. Let me handle it. He didn't answer immediately, which told her he'd already been thinking about exactly this. If you're in danger, if I'm in danger, I'll use the word Atlantic. That's the signal. Any other scenario, you stay outside and you let me work. She said it steadily. This only functions if Evan believes he has me to himself. The moment he suspects he's surrounded, he shuts down. We get nothing. Atlantic, he said. Atlantic. He left. She turned back to the files and sat with them for another hour, reading things about the man she'd dated for 8 months, that she was still, on some level, trying to make fit with the man she thought she'd known. It didn't fit. She kept trying, and it kept not fitting, and eventually she closed the folder and turned off the lamp and lay down in the dark and waited for morning to come. She called Evan at 9:15. He answered on the second ring, and his voice had exactly the texture she remembered, warm, slightly careful, calibrated to the particular frequency of a man who had learned to make people feel at ease. She'd found it comforting for 8 months. She found it sickening now, and kept that completely out of her own voice. I got your call, she said. Sorry I missed it. Crazy night. I heard, he said. I heard you left the wedding early. Are you okay? I'm fine. It was a lot. You know how family things get. Yeah. A pause. Calculated, she thought now. The kind of pause that gives you room to fill it. Where are you now, Boston? She lied. My apartment. I came back this morning. Good. Another pause. Listen, I've been worried about you. I know we're not. I know things ended, and I respect that. But I heard something that got me a little concerned, and I'd feel better if we could just sit down somewhere. Just for an hour. The care in his voice was extraordinary. She would have believed it completely 72 hours ago. Sure, she said. What are you worried about? I'd rather say it in person. Careful. Still careful. There's a place in the seaport I like. Lunch today, I can come to you. She'd prepared for him to suggest a location. She redirected smoothly. Actually, you know the bar on Congress Street? The one with the pool table in the back? A half second. Harborside? That one. I'd feel better somewhere I know. Is that okay? Of course, he said. 1 o'clock? 1 o'clock. She hung up. Rosa helped her with the wire. It was smaller than she expected, a flat adhesive strip worn against the ribs, the receiver the size of a watch battery. Rosa did it efficiently and without comment, which Claire appreciated. She stood in the bathroom in a plain sweater and dark jeans and let Rosa work, and looked at herself in the mirror and thought about the fact that she was about to sit across from someone who had spent the better part of a year treating her like a mechanism. She didn't look frightened. She checked. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was going to carry it out. She thought that was accurate enough. Harborside was a neighborhood bar on the eastern edge of the seaport, the kind of place that had survived multiple waves of gentrification by being completely uninterested in accommodating any of them. Pool table in the back, scarred wooden bar, windows that hadn't been fully cleaned since approximately the Obama administration. It was loud enough at lunch to cover conversation, and small enough that exits were visible from any seat. She chose a booth near the back wall. She could see the front door. She could see the side hallway to the emergency exit. She ordered a club soda with lime and sat with her coat folded beside her and watched the door and felt the wire adhesive against her ribs like a small, constant pressure. Evan arrived at 1:03. He looked exactly like himself. What she understood now was its own kind of accomplishment, the ability to look precisely like the person you were pretending to be. He was 34 and tallish and had the kind of open face that telegraphed trustworthiness, the way a politician's handshake telegraphed warmth deliberately, effectively, without a great deal of actual feeling behind it. He wore a green jacket she recognized. She'd told him once she liked it, and he'd worn it regularly after that. She wondered now if he'd written that down somewhere. He smiled when he saw her. The smile reached his eyes, which she'd always thought meant something. He sat across from her. "You look good." "I look tired," she said. "What did you want to tell me?" The directness surprised him slightly. She caught it in the shift around his eyes before he reassembled. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. I heard some things about what happened at the wedding, and I've been." "What did you hear?" He wrapped his hands around the glass of water the server had brought, without him asking. "I heard you left with someone. Someone people recognized." He said it carefully, like he was reporting rather than probing. "I heard it was Vincent Calder." She let a beat of silence expand. "Where did you hear that?" she said. "Around." He met her eyes. "Claire, I know about your history with him. You told me early on not everything but enough. And I care about you, even though we're not together anymore. And when I heard his name in connection with you, I got genuinely worried." "Why? Because he's dangerous." She looked at him. "Evan, I mean that seriously. The man has... What do you know about Vincent Calder specifically?" "A shift. Subtle. The kind you only catch if you're looking for it." His hands on the glass tightened fractionally. "I know what anyone in Boston knows. He runs shipping. He has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that involves things people don't talk about out loud." She nodded slowly. "And how do you know what anyone in Boston knows about Vincent Calder? Given that you're from Providence and you've been living in Boston for 4 years and you work in software architecture?" The silence lasted exactly long enough to tell her everything she'd needed to confirm. "I read things," he said. "What articles?" "People talk." "What people, Claire?" His voice shifted. Gentle, slightly urgent, the voice of a man trying to redirect. "I'm here because I'm worried about you. I didn't come here to..." "I know why you came," she said. Everything stopped. He looked at her across the booth. The bar noise continued around them. Pool balls, a television, 2 men arguing about a game at the bar, and it all felt very far away. "I want to help you," he said. "Quieter now. Whatever you've gotten into with Calder, there are people who can." "Stop." She said it the way you say a word, when you want it to land in the room like something physical. "Stop talking." She kept her eyes on his face. "I need you to understand that I know." Not suspect, no. She watched his expression process that. "I've seen the financial records, the shell companies, the deposits, the meeting photographs." She paused. "I know who you work for, and I know what you were doing while you were with me." His face did something she hadn't fully anticipated. Not the calculation she'd expected, something messier. Something that looked almost like grief, which she found in some ways worse than if he'd just gone cold. "Claire, how long did they know before we met?" she said. "Did they place you specifically, or did you find out who I was after?" He was silent. "Tell me," she said. "Not for him. For me. I want to know." He looked down at the water glass. His jaw worked. "I found out after," he said. "About 3 weeks in. I mentioned you to someone who..." He stopped. "Someone in my other situation. They recognized your name, and they told you to stay. They told me it was an opportunity." He said it to the table. "I'm not going to dress it up. Did you..." She stopped herself. Started again. "The 8 months. Were you ever just was any of it?" "Yes." He looked up. "Not the part about what I was supposed to be finding out. The rest of it was..." He exhaled. "I know that doesn't help." "It doesn't. I know." She looked at him for a long moment. She'd prepared for this conversation. She'd run through variations of it in her head since the night before. She thought she was ready for it. She had not fully prepared for the part where he looked at her like that. Evan. She put both hands flat on the table. The people you work for know I was with Vincent the other night. They sent you here. What do they want from me? He was quiet. Tell me. They want a meeting, he said. Not Vescari himself, someone who works for him. Someone senior. They want to ask you some questions about Calder's operation, and in exchange. No, in exchange, they leave you alone. Completely. You walk away from all of this, I said no. Claire, these are not people who... I said no, steady. Tell them I said no. Tell them that I don't have the information they want, and that any pressure they apply will result in federal investigators receiving a great deal more documentation than they currently have access to. She held his eyes. Tell them I'm not an asset. I'm a liability. And the most sensible thing they can do is leave me alone. Evan looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. They won't accept that. Tell them anyway. You don't understand how these people operate. You'd be surprised what I understand. She pulled her coat from beside her. I'm going to leave now, and you're going to let me. She slid out of the booth. She was on her feet, coat over her arm, 2 steps from the table, when Evan said it. There's something else you should know. She stopped. Her back was to him. She turned around slowly. His face was wrong. Not the careful warmth of 3 minutes ago, not the raw discomfort of the confession. Something different. Something that looked like a man who had just decided to burn the last thing he was holding. Sit down, he said. Say it from here. He looked at the table for a moment. Then at her. Vescari's people didn't find out about you from surveillance at the wedding. They knew before, days before. He paused. Someone gave them information that you'd be at the wedding. Specifically, that Vincent might come if he knew you were there. The room did not physically change, but something in it did. What are you saying? She said. I'm saying someone tipped them off. About the wedding. About where you'd be. About the fact that you still had Vincent's number. He kept his eyes on her face. They didn't get that from surveillance, Claire. Someone who knew your life gave that to them. She stood very still. Who? I don't know the name. I know it was someone close to you. Not Vincent's side. Yours. She heard the words. She heard each one. She filed them in the part of her brain that was still functioning at full capacity, which at this precise moment felt like a very small room. How close, she said. He didn't answer. He looked at the table. Evan, how close? Close enough to know about the wedding, he said. Close enough to know you'd be there and that Calder's number was in your phone. He looked up. That's all I know, I swear to you. She stood there in the noise of the bar, for what felt like much longer than it was. Then she walked out. Outside, the air was cold and the seaport wind came off the water and hit her in the face. And she stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in, and her mind was doing several things simultaneously that she needed to slow down and separate. Someone had set this up. Not Vescari. Not Evan. Someone who knew her. Someone who knew about the wedding. Knew about her phone, knew enough about her history with Vincent to understand that his number still being in her contacts was a meaningful fact. Someone who knew her life. She put her hand to her ribs, felt the wire under the sweater. She walked north, away from the bar, toward the parking structure, 2 blocks up where Braddock had positioned the car. She could feel eyes, not specifically, not visibly, but the ambient awareness that came from knowing Vincent's people were on the exterior of a quarter-mile radius, watching foot traffic, watching for anyone moving toward her with intention. She was halfway up the block when her phone rang. Dana. Her phone showed Dana office, she answered. Dana, I'm about to get in the car. Can I call you? Claire. Dana's voice was wrong. Tight in a way that Dana, who managed a 40-person architecture firm scheduling and communications with the composure of a trauma surgeon, was almost never wrong. I need to tell you something. What happened? Someone called this morning. Before I got in, they left a message on the main line. A pause. They said they wanted me to tell you that Audrey had been contacted. That someone reached out to Audrey to ask about you. Another pause. They said to tell you that if you didn't make certain arrangements by tonight, the contact with Audrey would become something more direct. Claire stopped walking. More direct, she said. That's what they said. I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to... Does Audrey know about the call? I don't know. I just got this message. I called you immediately. Don't call anyone else. Don't say anything to anyone at the firm. I'll handle it. She kept her voice level, the way you keep a glass of water level when your hands are shaking. Thank you, Dana. She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk of a street in Boston in the October cold, and she understood what had just happened, with the clarity of someone who has had the scaffolding pulled from beneath every assumption she'd been operating on. Someone in her life had set this in motion, and now Vescari's people had touched Audrey. Audrey, who was on her honeymoon in Portugal with Daniel. Audrey, who had nothing to do with any of this, and whose only crime was being related to the sister who'd run from the wrong man and accidentally called him back and set off a chain of consequences that had now arrived at her door. Claire called Vincent. He picked up on the first ring. I heard, he said. Braddock had been monitoring. Of course he had. Get to the car. They have Audrey, I know. Get to the car, Claire. They contacted my office. They left a message for me through Dana. I know, the car is 30 yards north of you. Get in it. She looked up the block. The dark sedan was there, idling. She walked toward it. She got in. Hartley was driving. The partition was down. She sat in the back, and the car moved, and she stared at the back of Hartley's head and thought about Evan's faces. When he'd said someone close to you, the way he'd looked at the table, the way he hadn't looked at her when she asked how close. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled her contacts. She stopped at a name. The realization arrived the way realizations of that magnitude always arrive, not with noise, but with a cold, settling certainty that feels less like discovery and more like finally seeing something that was always there. She thought about the conversations she'd had with her mother at the wedding. The specific things her mother had said. 3 men at this reception who are exactly the kind of person you should be meeting. Her mother's face through the glass doors of the terrace when Vincent arrived. Not afraid, not confused, watchful. She thought about the fact that her mother had known, since Claire came back to Boston 4 years ago, that she kept Vincent's contact in her phone. Claire had mentioned it once during a conversation after a glass of wine, in the way you mention a thing you're not proud of to the person who knows you well enough that concealing it costs more than admitting it. She thought about who would have known about the wedding, about the guest list, about the specific, particular detail of which number was in Claire's phone under a single letter. She thought about Patricia Hallowell, 61 and precise, who had never once in 5 years asked Claire directly about what she'd run from, who had accepted the vague explanation and the changed subject, and had never pushed, which had seemed like grace and might have been something else, who had perhaps found her own way of pushing. Vincent, she said. I'm here. I need you to look into something for me. She said it very carefully, the way you say things you're not sure you want to be true once they've been spoken out loud. I need to know if anyone reached out to Vescari's network in the week before the wedding. And I need to know what information they provided. A pause. Short, who are we looking at? She said the name. The car moved through the seaport streets, and the wind came off the water, and the Atlantic was somewhere behind her now, somewhere to the east, not visible but present the way it always was in this city everywhere, underneath everything. Cold and enormous, and not done with any of them yet. Vincent didn't say anything for a moment after she said the name. Then I'll have Braddock run it. How long? A few hours. I need it faster than that. I'll see what I can do. She put the phone down on the seat beside her, pressed both palms against her thighs. The car hit the expressway, and the city dropped away on either side into the gray autumn sky. Her mother's voice on the phone the week before the wedding. It'll be good for you to be there, Claire. You spend too much time hiding from things. She had thought that was her mother being her mother. She was starting to understand that sometimes a sentence means exactly what it sounds like, and nothing more. And sometimes a sentence is the surface of something much colder underneath. And the only way to know which is to be willing to follow it all the way down. She was willing. She had nothing left to protect by not being willing. The car drove north toward the coast, and the sky pressed down, and she sat in the back and looked at nothing and understood. For the first time she'd picked up the phone at her sister's wedding and heard the wrong voice. that the worst thing she'd been afraid of was not Vincent Calder. It was the possibility that the danger had never come from outside her life. It had come from inside it. Braddock called at 4:17 in the afternoon. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table in the glass house, with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched and a legal pad she'd been writing on for the last 2 hours, not notes exactly. More like the physical act of organizing a mind that kept threatening to go somewhere. She couldn't afford to let it go. Vincent was in the adjacent room with 2 of his people. She could hear the low register of their voices through the wall, not words, just the cadence of men working through a problem that had weight. Her phone buzzed. Braddock. She answered before the second vibration. Tell me. We ran the network contacts for the week prior to the wedding. His voice had the particular flatness of a man delivering information he understood was going to land hard. There was an outreach, not directly to Vescari, to a mid-level contact in his Providence operation. Someone who functions as an information broker between civilian sources and the organization. When, 6 days before the wedding, the contact was brief. 13 minutes, made from a landline registered to a residence in Wellesley. Wellesley. Her mother had lived in Wellesley for 23 years. Claire set down the pen, very carefully. What information was transferred? The caller provided a name, female, associated with a prior relationship with Vincent Calder. Confirmed current address in Boston. Confirmed attendance at a specific event on a specific date. A pause. And confirmed the existence of a private contact number still in the subject's possession. The kitchen was very quiet. That's everything they needed, Claire said. Yes. To make sure Vescari's people were watching the wedding. And to make sure that if Calder showed up, they'd have enough to move on the subject as a valuable secondary contact. Another pause. I'm sorry, Miss Hallowell. She picked up the coffee. Put it down. Does Vincent know? I briefed him 10 minutes ago. Okay. She kept her voice completely level, which was the hardest thing she'd done in 3 days. She'd done several hard things in 3 days. Thank you, Braddock. She ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the legal pad. The notes she'd made were in her own handwriting, but she read them like they belonged to someone else. Names, timelines, connections. The architecture of the last week laid out in the structured shorthand of a woman who'd spent 10 years reading blueprints. Sound like green buildings for a living. She understood how buildings for a living. She understood how things held together, and where the load-bearing elements were and what happened to the overall structure when one of them failed. She picked up her phone and called her mother. Patricia Hallowell answered on the 3rd ring, which meant she'd seen the name and taken 2 rings to decide. Claire, she said. Are you all right? I've been trying to reach. Tell me why, Claire said. Silence, Mom. She said it evenly. No heat in it yet. Just the word. Tell me why. I don't know what You called someone in Providence 6 days before the wedding. You gave them my name and my address, and the date of the wedding, and the fact that I still had Vincent's number. You gave them everything they needed to turn me into a target. She stopped. Breathed. I need you to tell me why you did that. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Claire counted it. 7 seconds. I wanted him to find you, her mother said. Claire closed her eyes. I wanted him to find you, and I knew he wouldn't unless he had a reason to. I knew you'd never call him. I knew you'd go on living in that apartment, in that careful nothing life you built, and you'd never... Patricia's voice broke slightly, then recovered. I made a mistake. I understand that now. I understand that it became dangerous, and I never intended. You handed my name to organized crime, Claire said. You handed it to people who were going to use me as leverage against him. You handed it to people who contacted my office this morning and threatened Audrey. A sharp intake of breath. They threatened Audrey. Yes. Final. You did that, Claire. I didn't know it would. What did you think would happen? What did you imagine a man like the one you called would do with the information you gave him? I thought they would tell Vincent. That's all. I thought someone would tell Vincent you'd be there, and he would come, and... Her voice fractured again. I thought he'd come for you. I thought you'd stop running. Claire pressed her fingers against her eyes. Her mother had watched her for 5 years. Watched her date Evan with the resigned expression of someone accepting a lesser option. watched her build careful routines and careful distances and careful professional relationships that never got close enough to matter. Her mother had decided with the particular arrogance of a parent who believes they understand their child better than the child understands themselves, that what Claire needed was to be maneuvered back toward the thing she'd run from. And she had gone to the only people she knew of who had a line to Vincent Calder, without understanding what those people were. "Did someone approach you?" Claire said. "Before you made that call, did anyone contact you about me or about Vincent?" A pause. There was a man. He came to the house about 3 weeks before the wedding. He said he was an associate of Vincent's, that he was concerned about Vincent, that Vincent hadn't been the same since you left. He said if I wanted to help, there might be a way. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. Not Vescari's people approaching her mother. Vescari's people posing as Vincent's people approaching her mother. Finding the vulnerability, a mother who believed her daughter was unhappy, who wanted to fix it, and pressing on it until it opened. "He used you," Claire said. "I thought he used you to get to me, and you let him because you wanted to believe he was trying to help." The silence was different this time. Not the silence of someone formulating a response. The silence of someone understanding, arriving at that understanding fully for the first time, and not having anywhere to put it. Claire. Her mother's voice was barely above a conversation level now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I need you are." Claire looked at the window. The late afternoon light was going gray over the water. "Don't contact anyone. Don't open the door to anyone you don't recognize. Don't discuss any of this on the phone." She paused. "I'll call you when this is over." She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Just one moment, because a moment was all she could afford. Then she stood up and walked through the wall of low voices into the next room. Vincent was at the table with Braddock, and a man named Cole, younger dark, the quietest person in any room he was in, and they had maps on the table, which she registered as significant. Not digital, paper, the kind of preparation that happened when you expected to be somewhere without connectivity. All three of them looked up when she came in. "You talked to her," Vincent said. "Not a question. Vescari's people ran a play on her," Claire said. "Came to her house posing as your associates. Told her they could get you to come find me if she gave them what they needed. She stood at the end of the table. She didn't know who they were. She thought she was helping." Something moved across Vincent's face. Complex. She couldn't fully read it and didn't try. "That's a Vescari move," Braddock said. "Find the civilian angle. Apply pressure somewhere the target isn't watching." "I know what it is," Claire said. "What I need to know is what we're doing about Audrey." Vincent looked at Cole. Cole gave a minimal nod. "Team's already on the way to Portugal," Vincent said. "Discreet. They'll sit on the hotel until this is resolved." She exhaled through her nose. One thing handled. And Vescari. Vincent put his hand on the map. He's moved his primary operation to a waterfront facility in Quincy. His people have been pulling resources toward it for the last 48 hours. We think he's consolidating because the federal investigation got closer than he anticipated. Your tip worked. Faster than expected. He paused. Which means his window for using you as leverage is closing. When a man like Vescari feels pressure from federal investigators and his asset acquisition timeline collapses simultaneously, he stops being strategic. He gets reckless, she said. "Yes, which means tonight." "Yes." She looked at the map. Quincy waterfront. She knew that stretch. She'd done a site assessment for a client in that corridor 2 years ago. Industrial post-working waterfront, the kind of area that had been scheduled for development 3 separate times and stalled 3 separate times because nobody wanted to put money into something that still smelled like fish processing and diesel. "He's going to move on me tonight," she said. "Through Evan," Braddock said. "Mercer called again 40 minutes ago. He left a message." He said, glanced his phone, reading. "Tell her I need to see her. Tell her I have information about the person who set this up, and she needs to hear it before tonight. Tell her I'm trying to help." "He's not trying to help," Claire said. "No," Braddock agreed, "but he may have information." And the location he suggested, he paused. He named a place. Abandoned waterfront restaurant on the Quincy waterfront. The Harrow Building. Vincent looked at the map. His finger moved to a point on the coast, coincidentally adjacent to Vescari's consolidated operation. Not coincidentally, Claire said. No, she pulled out a chair and sat down. Put both forearms on the table. Walk me through it. They spent 90 minutes on it. The Harrow Building was a 3-story commercial structure that had been a working waterfront restaurant for 30 years and had been closed for 4. It sat at the end of a commercial pier, water on 3 sides, a single road access from the land side, 2 loading docks on the south face, a service entrance on the north. Structurally sound by the last inspection, but dark, empty, stripped of everything worth taking by whoever had come through it in the years since. Vescari's facility was 200 meters east, behind a chain-link perimeter that was posted as a private shipping concern. Braddock laid it out with the precision of a man who had run this kind of operation before and had learned which details you could skip and which ones got people killed. 2 of Vincent's people on the landside road, 50 meters back. 2 more on the water approach a boat, dark, positioned on the south side of the pier. Hartley in the primary vehicle. Cole as the close exterior contact, moving position. Federal investigators, who had been running active surveillance on Vescari's waterfront operation since Vincent's tip had accelerated their timeline, were positioned on the industrial access road to the east. They didn't know about the meeting. They didn't need to. A sound like green wood splitting, they were there for their own reasons, and their presence was a fact on the ground that could be used if the situation required it. Claire would go in alone. Vincent said it the way he said all the things he didn't want to say directly, without the inflection of a man who hoped she'd argue him out of it. The wire, Braddock said. Same configuration as the bar. And the signal, Claire said. Atlantic, Vincent said. She looked at him across the table. You stay outside. Until the signal. No, you stay outside regardless. If I say Atlantic, you send Cole. Not you, that's not. Vincent, she said it carefully. If Evan sees you, it ends. Whatever Vescari is hoping to use this meeting, for whatever play he's running it, dies the moment you walk in that door. He needs to believe I came alone because I'm frightened and isolated, and I don't have anyone else. You're not frightened and isolated. I know that. He doesn't. She held his gaze. Let me use it. The table was quiet. Braddock looked at his coffee. Cole looked at the map. Vincent looked at her, with the expression of a man who had spent 41 years being the person, who decided what happened next, and was being asked again to be something different. Cole goes in on the signal, he said. I'm on the exterior. Agreed. If Cole can't reach you, then you come in, she said. But that's the last option, not the first. He nodded once. The kind of nod that was also a concession, and both of them knew it. They left at 9:30. The storm arrived before they reached Quincy, not a surprise. The forecast had been building it all day, the kind of Atlantic October storm that comes in with serious intent and makes the coast feel temporary. Rain came horizontal off the water by the time Hartley pulled the car onto the industrial access road and cut the lights. The windshield filled with moving water, and the pier was a dark shape at the end of a darker road, and the Harrow Building at the end of the pier was barely a silhouette against the sky. Claire sat in the back, with her coat buttoned to the throat and the wire against her ribs and her phone in her coat pocket, powered off. They'd agreed on the wire, only no phone, nothing Vescari's people could scan. She looked at the building through the rain-blurred window. 2 minutes, Braddock said from the front seat. She nodded. Vincent was in the other vehicle, parked further back on the land approach. She knew this because they'd gone over positions 3 times in the last hour. She did not look for his lights in the rain because looking wouldn't help anything, and she needed her attention inside the car, on the building, on what she was about to walk into. She thought about Evan's face in the bar that afternoon. The green jacket, not the part about what I was supposed to be finding out. The rest of it was she pushed it aside. Ready, she said. She got out of the car into the storm. The wind hit her immediately, full body. The way coastal wind during a storm makes you understand viscerally that weather is a physical fact and not a backdrop. Rain came sideways, and her coat was soaked in the first 30 seconds, and the pier boards under her feet were slick with water, and the building at the end of the pier was dark except for one interior light visible. Through what had been the front dining room windows, Someone was already inside. She walked the length of the pier with her hands loose at her sides, and the rain loud enough to cover the sound of her own footsteps, which she found clarifying in the specific way that all external silence is clarifying when your internal noise is high. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open. The Harrow building smelled like rot and salt water and the particular cold of spaces that have been closed too long. The front room, the old dining room, was stripped bare, subfloor, exposed, conduit hanging from the ceiling where light fixtures had been removed. The single source of light was a work lamp on the floor near the far wall, the kind used by construction crews, the kind that runs on a generator. She could hear the generator somewhere in the back of the building. Evan was standing next to the work lamp. He was alone. That was the first thing she checked. He was alone, visible, hands at his sides, in the same green jacket from the bar, and he was visibly more frightened than he'd been at the bar, and that frightened her, because Evan frightened was a different variable than Evan managed. "You came," he said. "You said you had information." "I do." He glanced at the door behind her. "Are you alone?" "Yes." He held her gaze for a moment, deciding whether to believe it. "Vescari is here. Not this building, the facility to the east. He knows about this meeting. He's the one who told me to set it up." "I know." He blinked. "Then why did you—" "Because you said you had information and I need to know what it is." She stepped further into the room. Water was dripping from the ceiling in two places, landing on the subfloor in the kind of irregular percussion that makes empty buildings feel inhabited. "What did you want to tell me?" He ran a hand through his wet hair. He'd walked here from somewhere he was soaked too, the collar of the green jacket dark with rain. Vescari doesn't just want information about Calder's operation. He wants something specific. He paused. He wants the federal contract records. Calder Maritime has 3 federal shipping contracts, defense logistics, East Coast ports. Vescari wants the bid documents, the internal pricing, the contact names. He looked at her. He thinks you have access to them. Why would I have access to Calder Maritime's federal contracts? Because he thinks Calder gave them to you. He thinks he's been told that Calder keeps documentation with people he trusts. Off-site, away from the company's official records. He paused again. He was told you're one of those people. Who told him that? Evan looked at the floor. Evan, who told him that? Someone in Calder's organization, he said. Someone who's been feeding Vescari information for about 8 months. Someone senior. The generator hummed in the back. Rain hammered the windows. 8 months, she thought. The same window as Evan. The same window as Vescari's people approaching her mother. 8 months of something building from multiple directions, simultaneously. Who, she said. I don't have a name, I have a description. He looked up. Someone who's been with Calder a long time. Someone he trusts completely. Who's been running intelligence to Vescari since. The back door of the building blew open. Not the wind. The wind was constant, and this was different, a specific, directed force. And the men who came through the back entrance were moving, with the practiced speed of people who had done this before and knew the difference between a second of hesitation and a door that didn't get opened. 3 of them. Dark jackets. The man in front was large enough to fill the door frame and didn't seem particularly concerned about the rain or the space or Claire standing in the middle of the room, which told her immediately what category of person he was. Behind him came someone smaller, older, a man in his 60s with gray hair cut short and a waterproof coat, and the settled, unhurried manner of someone who arrives after the doors are already open because the doors are always already open for him. Dominic Vescari looked at her the way a person looks at an item they've ordered and are now assessing for condition. "Miss Hallowell," he said. His voice was accented faintly, not strongly, the accent of a man who'd spent decades moderating it. "I appreciate you coming." She kept her body still. "Hands loose. I didn't come for you." "No, but here we are anyway." He walked further into the room. The large man stayed near the door, another positioned near the windows. Evan had gone completely rigid beside the work lamp, which told her he hadn't known about this specific arrangement. "I have a proposal for you." "I heard it already," she said. "Federal contract records. I don't have them." "Think you do." I don't. I think he stopped, tilted his head very slightly in the manner of someone listening. I think you're not being fully honest with me, which I understand, it's a natural response. But I want to be clear about the parameters of tonight. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a phone. Turned the screen toward her. Your sister Audrey. Currently at the Hotel Bairro Alto in Lisbon.
Room 412.
Looked at the screen with the expression of someone reading a menu. She had dinner in the hotel restaurant at 8 local time. She went up to her room at 10:30. Her husband is a sound sleeper. I understand the room has excellent window access from the building across the alley. Every muscle in Claire's body went rigid, and she controlled it. She controlled it because she had to control it, because if she stopped controlling it, the room would change in a way she could not afford. That's a threat against a civilian, she said. It's a description of a situation, Vescari said pleasantly. The situation changes depending on what happens in the next few minutes. She looked at him. She looked at the large man by the door. She looked at Evan, who had the expression of a man who understood he was no longer a participant in this situation and had become a prop in it. She needed to buy time. Braddock was monitoring the wire. Vincent was on the exterior. Cole was on position. She needed them to understand what was happening inside this room without triggering the signal yet, because the moment it twisted, the signal went out and people came through the doors. Vescari's man by the windows would have 4 seconds to make a call to Lisbon, and those 4 seconds were the entire problem. Let's say I have access to what you're describing, she said slowly. What's the exchange? Vescari almost smiled. You walk out of here tonight. Your sister remains asleep in her hotel room. Vincent Calder loses 3 federal contracts and a great deal of internal intelligence, which is not your problem. You go back to your life, and Vincent, also not your problem. She looked at the floor for a moment. Subfloor. Someone had stripped this building down to its bones and left it. She understood buildings. She understood what you built on and what you didn't and what the ground under your feet could actually hold. She looked up. There's a mole in Calder's organization, she said. You've had someone feeding you information for 8 months. Someone senior. She watched Vescari's face. I want the name. Something shifted in Vescari's expression. Not surprise exactly. The recalibration of a man who'd entered a room expecting one level of opponent and was adjusting his read. That's not part of the exchange, he said. I know. I'm not negotiating, I'm asking a question. She held his gaze. Because whoever gave you information about me, whoever told you I was valuable, whoever set this entire thing in motion, they're also feeding information to federal investigators. Did you know that? A very small pause. She'd guessed. She hadn't known. But the pause told her the guess was right. Because the tip that accelerated the federal timeline on your operation, she said, didn't come from Vincent. It came from whoever is playing both sides of your relationship with his organization. And that person, she let it sit for a beat, that person is why federal investigators are currently parked on the industrial access road to your east. Not because of Vincent. Because your own source burned you. Vescari looked at her for a long moment. The generator hummed. Rain hit the windows in sheets. You're bluffing, he said. Look out the east window, she said. He didn't look. But the man near the window did. A small movement, a tilt of his head toward the glass. Which was enough. Vescari knew. She saw it in the set of his shoulders, the almost imperceptible change of a man who has just confirmed something he was hoping wasn't true. The name of the mole, she said again. And I walk out of here. You deal with your federal situation. I deal with mine. Nobody needs to call Lisbon. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man running a rapidly deteriorating calculation. Hartley, he said. The room stopped. She heard the word, and it didn't make sense for a full second because Hartley was a name she knew. Hartley was the man who'd held the car door for her 3 nights ago at the Ashford estate. Hartley was the gray-haired, quiet man in his 50s who'd driven her through the rain to this pier. Hartley has been with Calder for 19 years, Vescari said. He said it the way you say something you're saying, because you've already decided to blow the structure down. He came to us 8 months ago. Voluntary. He had his reasons. He paused. He was in the vehicle tonight. With you. She heard the wire against her ribs, and she heard the rain, and she heard Evan breathing somewhere to her left, and she heard everything in the building that was louder than speech, and underneath all of it she heard herself think, Hartley drove me here. Hartley is parked 50 meters up the road. Hartley knows exactly where Vincent is standing right now in the dark. Vincent, she said, not to anyone in the room. The wire. She said it to the wire. Vincent, Hartley is the mole. Hartley's the large man by the door moved. He was faster than he looked, which was the problem with large men who were also professionals. And she was already stepping back when he reached her, but the space was too small, and his hand closed on her arm above the elbow, with the grip of someone who did this for money and did it well. She hit the emergency alarm switch on the wall beside her with her free hand. She'd seen it when she came in red industrial alarm panel still, wired to the building's emergency system, which was still live because the generator was live. She'd positioned herself next to it deliberately. The alarm was enormous. The alarm was the loudest thing in a building full of loud things, and it went off like a physical event, a wall of sound that hit every person in the room simultaneously and changed the nature of the space in an instant. The large man's grip did not loosen. She twisted toward him instead of away from him, which he hadn't expected, and drove her elbow into the space below his ribs, with the force of someone who had been carrying 5 days of contained fury and had just found somewhere to put it. He lost about 40% of his grip. She pulled her arm free and moved toward the side hallway, toward the service corridor, toward the loading dock she'd memorized from the floor plan. Braddock had laid out on the tables 6 hours ago. Behind her, she heard Evan yelling something she couldn't parse over the alarm. She heard Vescari's voice, sharp and clipped, giving an instruction. She hit the service corridor at a run, and the corridor was dark and the floor was wet from roof leaks, and she ran it by memory, 12 feet, left turn, 8 feet. Loading dock door, and hit the dock door with both hands, and it opened into the storm. The loading dock faced south. Water. The dock was 4 feet above water level, and the rain was almost opaque, and she stood on the edge of the dock in the dark and rain, and the alarm was still going behind her, and she heard the service corridor door open. She turned. The large man was in the doorway. The loading dock was a dead end. She knew it was a dead end. She'd known it when she came through the door. She'd also known there was a boat. Below her and to the left, close enough to the dock that the rain hadn't masked the sound of the engine, a dark hull was visible through the downpour Cole's position. The water approach exactly where Braddock had said it would be. She jumped. 4 feet down and 6 feet lateral was not a jump she would have attempted in any other situation. She hit the rail of the boat with her forearms, and the impact was violent enough to take her breath completely, and she went down to her knees on the wet deck and grabbed anything that was solid and held on while the boat moved under her. I've got her, Cole's voice, immediate, his hand on her arm, not the grip of the large man, the grip of someone helping. She got upright. Her left arm was already aching from the rail impact in a way that suggested she'd find out more about that later. Rain came off the water in every direction. Hartley, she said. Get to Vincent, Hartley is. We heard, Cole said. He had a radio in his other hand. We heard it on the wire. Is Vincent? He's out of the vehicle. Cole was already moving to the boat's controls. He got out when he heard you say the name. The loading dock above them was empty. The large man had stopped at the edge and looked down and made the decision that the water was not where his job ended. The boat moved away from the dock. She looked back at the Harrow, building the alarm still going. The work lamp visible through the front windows, the storm wrapping the whole pier in moving gray water, and she thought about Vincent, standing 50 meters up a dark road, realizing, in the moment she said the name, that the man he'd trusted for 19 years was sitting in the vehicles beside him. She gripped the rail. Faster, she said. Cole pushed the throttle. The boat came around the south face of the pier, and the rain was worse on the open water, and the Quincy shoreline was a smear of lights through the downpour, and she looked east toward the industrial facility, and she could see faintly, through the rain, the light configuration of the vehicles on the land approach road. One of them was moving. Not the primary, the second vehicle, the one Hartley had been driving, pulling away from the position in the direction that was not toward the facility, not toward the police lights that were now visible further east, but northwest, along the coastal road, accelerating. That's Hartley, Cole said. I know. Vincent's vehicle isn't moving. She looked at the stationary lights. Stationary was not the same as safe, but it was better than the alternative. Get to the dock. Get to Vincent. Cole brought the boat in hard toward the dock access on the north face, and she was off the boat before it was fully secured, up the dock ladder, with her left arm, screaming at her, onto the pier surface and running north toward the road. She hit the road 40 seconds later. Vincent's vehicle was still there. Engine on, lights on, driver's door open. She got to the car and looked in. Empty. She turned. The road was dark and rain-soaked, and 50 yards ahead, she could see two figures standing, not on the ground, both standing, which mattered, which was the first thing she checked. Vincent and Hartley. She walked toward them fast. Not running. She needed to see what she was walking into before she arrived in it. Hartley was at the road's edge, back against the guardrail where the coastal road dropped off toward the water. Was still in his dark jacket, and his gray hair was flat with rain, and he stood with the stillness of a man who had run the numbers and arrived at a figure he didn't like, but couldn't dispute. Vincent was standing 4 feet away from him, not touching him, not holding him, just standing in the rain at 4 feet, which in Vincent Calder's geography was a very specific distance. She stopped beside Vincent. Hartley looked at her. His face was wet and gray, and he looked like a man who had made one very large decision a long time ago and had spent 8 months waiting for the accounting. Why, Vincent said. Not Claire's question. Vincent's question. Said in the voice he used for things that had weight. Hartley looked at him for a long moment. My son, he said. They had my son. The rain came off the water and hit all 3 of them equally, and Vincent stood very still in it, and Claire watched his face do something that had nothing to do with calculation, and everything to do with the particular human experience of learning. That betrayal has a reason that almost makes sense. Thomas, Vincent said. They found him 4 years ago, Hartley said. Before the debt. Before I had a way to cover it. His voice was completely flat. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this explanation in his own head for a long time, and had stopped opens like what he'd needed it to sound like. They said they'd clear it. If I gave them what they needed, they said Thomas would be... He stopped. And you believed them, Vincent said. I didn't have another option. You had me, Vincent said it quietly, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it at volume. 19 years, you had me. Hartley looked at the guardrail. I know. In the distance east, the sound of police vehicles was audible now, not sirens exactly. The radio and engine sound of law enforcement converging on a location with intention. Vescari's facility, the federal timeline accelerated by the tip, now arriving at its practical conclusion in real time through the rain. Vincent looked at Hartley for a long time. Then he looked at Claire. She saw what was in his face, and she understood what he was about to decide, and she put her hand on his arm. No, she said. Claire, no. She kept her hand on his arm, and she kept her voice level. Not tonight. Not this way. His jaw was set. His eyes were on Hartley, and they were not the eyes of a man making a business decision. He put you in that building, Vincent said. He put you in a room with Vescari. I know what he's been doing. She kept her hand where it was. Kept his eyes on her. This is not how tonight ends. That is not the decision you make right now. The rain. The lights from the police operation to the east. Hartley standing at the guardrail with the expression of a man who had perhaps stopped expecting this to end well for him a long time ago. Vincent looked at her. His arm under her hand was rigid with everything he was not doing, and she felt it, and she held his gaze, and she did not look away. There's a federal operation happening 200 meters east of us right now, she said quietly. They're going to be on this road inside 10 minutes. When they get here, what they find is Dominic Vescari and his people in a facility full of evidence. What they find is Evan Mercer, who is going to cooperate, because that is the only road out for Evan Mercer. She held his eyes. What they do not find is you, here, on this road, having done something that ends everything you've spent 3 days trying to protect. The sound from the east got closer. Vincent looked at her. She watched him make the decision. She watched it happen, in real time, The way the rigid line of his arm shifted, the way his jaw changed, the way his eyes moved from Hartley back to her and stayed there, because she was the thing that was anchoring the decision. "Braddock," he said, not to her, into his earpiece. "Come down the north approach. Bring the secondary vehicle." A pause. "And call someone about Hartley." He turned away from Hartley. He turned toward her. She was standing in the rain on a dark coastal road, with her left arm aching and her coat soaked through, and the wire still against her ribs, and the alarm from the Harrow building still faintly audible on the storm wind. And Vincent Calder turned toward her with the face of a man who had, in the last 40 seconds, made the hardest choice he had made in a very long time. "Are you hurt?" he said. "My arm. It's not serious." He looked at the arm. His face did something she didn't have a word for. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the rain came down on both of them, and somewhere to the east, the accounting that had been building for 8 months was finally arriving at the address it had always been heading for. And neither of them looked away from each other while it did. The hospital in Quincy was the kind of place that had seen everything and showed it fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency slightly off from comfortable, chairs bolted to the floor in configurations that discouraged sleeping, a front desk staffed at midnight by a woman who had achieved the particular professional equilibrium of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything that came through the door. Claire's left arm was not broken. The ER physician, young, efficient, with the clipped manner of someone 3 hours from the end of a long shift, told her this while examining the X-ray with the expression of a man reading a document he'd read 1,000 times. Severe contusion. 2 cracked ribs from the boat rail impact that she hadn't registered until the adrenaline dropped somewhere between the coastal road and the hospital waiting room. He wrapped the ribs. He gave her something for the pain that she accepted and did not take. She sat on the edge of the examination table in a hospital gown over her wet jeans and looked at the wall and took inventory. Audrey was safe. Cole had confirmed it 40 minutes ago. His people in Lisbon had made contact with the hotel security and confirmed that Audrey and Daniel's room was undisturbed. Audrey was asleep. She didn't know any of this had happened. That was the one clean outcome of the evening, and Claire held it carefully, the way you hold the one thing that didn't break. Evan was in federal custody. He'd been picked up at the Harrow building when investigators swept the pier he hadn't run, which surprised Braddock and didn't surprise Claire. Evan had, she suspected, been waiting for the door out for longer than he'd admitted. Scarcey's facility had produced, by Braddock's preliminary accounting, enough documentation to keep federal prosecutors occupied for a significant portion of the next decade. Vascari himself had been taken on the Industrial Access Road attempting to leave in a vehicle that 2 federal agents had boxed in with the unhurried efficiency of people who had been patient for 14 months and were now collecting what that patience had earned them. Hartley was in a separate federal holding situation that Vincent had described in 4 words. Braddock is handling it, and then had not discussed further. She was still thinking about Hartley's face on the road. "They had my son." The flat voice of a man who had made a calculation a long time ago that he'd never been able to fully stand behind and never been able to walk away from either. She didn't know what happened to Thomas. She didn't know if the debt had been cleared the way they'd promised, or if it had been one more layer of leverage applied to a man who was already past the point of options. She didn't know, and she understood that she might never know, and she sat with the discomfort of that the way you sit with any piece of a story that doesn't resolve into something clean. Vincent came into the examination room without knocking, which was characteristic, and which she had stopped having the energy to address. He looked at the wrapped ribs visible through the gap in the hospital gown, and his face did the thing it had been doing. On the road, the thing she didn't have a word for. 2 cracked ribs, she said. "Not broken. I'm fine." "You jumped off a loading dock. The boat was right there." Claire. "I'm fine, Vincent." He sat down on the chair beside the table, the chair for family members or people who weren't leaving, not the chair beside the door. He was still wet. His jacket was dark with rain across the shoulders. He'd been outside on the road, and then outside at the facility perimeter, talking to Braddock, and then outside the hospital entrance on his phone, and he hadn't been inside long enough to dry out, and he didn't appear to have noticed. The federal people want to speak with you tomorrow, he said. Braddock has a lawyer for you. I don't need your lawyer. The lawyer is good, and she has no connection to my organization, and tomorrow you'll want her in the room. He said it without inflection. Information, not argument. Her name is Sandra Okafor. She'll call you at 8. Claire looked at the wall. Okay, they're going to ask about the meeting at the bar and the meeting at the Harrow building. They know about the wire. The recording is evidence. You cooperate fully. Everything you know about Vescari's operation, everything Evan told you, everything from the building tonight. He paused. Nothing about my organization. That's a significant line to draw. You don't have information about my organization that's relevant to their investigation. You have information about Vescari's. Those are different things. He held her gaze. Sandra will help you understand where the line is. She looked at him. You've done this before. Helped someone through federal questioning. Yes, how many times enough? She looked away. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the hospital a door opened and closed, and someone's name was called over an intercom, and the ordinary machinery of a place that ran continuously, regardless of what happened, outside its walls and continued without interruption. My mother, she said. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I don't know yet. She said it honestly. I know she didn't understand what she was doing. I know she was manipulated. I know that whoever approached her found exactly the right pressure point and applied it correctly. She pressed her fingers against her thigh. I also know she made a choice. She decided that her read on what I needed was more important than asking me. And that decision put Audrey in a hotel room in Lisbon with someone positioned outside her window. Yes. So I don't know yet. She pulled the hospital gown straighter. I'll know more when I can be in the same room with her and not be. She stopped. Furious, he said. Yes. He nodded. He didn't offer anything else, which was correct. She didn't need anything else on that subject right now. Go home, she said. I'll get a car from here. I'll drive you. Vincent, not to the Coast House. He said it before she could object. To your apartment in Boston. I'll drive you, and Hartley's colleague will bring the sedan, and I'll take the sedan home. He looked at her. Let me do that much. She looked at him for a moment. At the wet jacket and the face that had been making that expression all night and the chair he'd chosen, which was the chair that meant he wasn't leaving. Okay, she said. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat of a car. She didn't recognize one of the others from the facility position and watched the highway lights move across the rain-wet windshield and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. The pain medication she hadn't taken was in her coat pocket. The ribs made themselves known every time the car went over an imperfection in the road, which was frequently because this was Massachusetts, and the roads were what they were. Hartley's son, she said. Thomas. Do you know where he is? A pause. He's in Providence. He's been there for 4 years. Working a legitimate job. The debt was cleared. Vescari's people kept that part of the arrangement. Another pause. He doesn't know his father was involved with them. Are you going to tell him? No, she looked at the road. What happens to Hartley? He cooperates with federal investigators. He has enough on Vescari's operation to be useful. Sandra will represent him, too, if he wants her. Vincent's hands were steady on the wheel. He won't do significant time. Probably. You arranged that. I made a call. Why, he was quiet for a moment. 19 years, he said. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter. What he did, it matters. But 19 years also matters, and Thomas matters. And there's a version of this where Hartley spends the rest of his life in a cell, and his son finds out why. And that doesn't help anything. He paused. It just hurts more people. She looked at his profile in the dark of the car. This was the thing about Vincent Calder, that she had been trying to fit into a simple category for 5 years, and had never managed. The man ran a criminal organization. He had made money from things that hurt people. He had operated in a world where violence was a tool and consequences were managed rather than faced. She knew all of that. She had known all of that the morning she left. She had also known, the morning she left, that he had never once been cruel to her, that he had, in every interaction she could remember, been more direct and more honest about his own nature than most people she'd known who lived entirely law-abiding lives. That whatever he was not a liar. Evan had been a liar. Evan had been kind and warm and attentive, and had been performing all of it in the service of an agenda she hadn't known to look for. Vincent had told her, early, almost too early, she'd thought at the time exactly what he was. He'd sat across from her at dinner 4 months into their relationship, and told her, in the plain language of a man who had apparently decided he was going to do this one thing, honestly, what Calder Maritime was underneath its public filings. He'd given her the choice. She'd needed 6 more months to make it, and then she'd made the wrong one, and they'd both been living inside the consequences ever since. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Evan," he said. She turned back to the windshield. 7 months ago, he said. "I should have found a way. I told myself I was respecting what you'd asked for." That was partly true. He paused. The other part was that telling you meant reopening something I'd spent a long time trying to close. "Did it ever close?" she said. "No, for me either," she said. And then, because she'd been not saying it for 5 years, and she was tired, and her ribs hurt, and the rain was coming down on a highway outside Boston, and she was done managing the distance. That's not an excuse for anything. I'm not saying it makes what happened tonight acceptable, or that I'm going to pretend the last 5 years were straightforward. I'm saying no. He didn't say anything. "I kept the number," she said. "I told myself it was practical. It wasn't practical." She stopped. "I don't know what it was, exactly. But it wasn't practical." "I know," he said quietly. "I need to figure some things out," she said. "About my life, and about what I want it to look like, and about my mother, and about what it means to—" She stopped again. Looked at the lights on the highway. "I need time." "I know. I'm not saying that as a version of goodbye. I know that too." She looked at him. He was watching the road. His face in profile was the same face that had been made by the lamp in the bedroom 2 nights ago, and made by the work lamp in the Harrow building, and made by the rain on the coastal road, and it was the same face it had always been. Which was the whole problem, and also, she was starting to think, the whole point. "How long is this going to take to resolve?" she said. "The federal situation, Vescari, all of it." "Months. The investigation will run through most of next year. You'll be a witness, not a subject. Sandra will manage your exposure." He glanced at her briefly. "You won't be in danger. That's done. And your organization." A pause. "That's a longer conversation." "I know," she said. "We don't have to have it tonight." Something in his face that was not relief exactly, but was something adjacent, the expression of a man who had been expecting one kind of ending and was recalibrating. "No," he said. "Not tonight." The highway became the city, and the city lights replaced slightly, and the rain softened slightly, the way rain does when buildings start interrupting the wind. And she directed him to Adams Street, and he found her building without needing more than the address, which she decided not to think too hard about. He pulled up in front. She didn't get out immediately. "The federal contracts," she said. "What Vescari thought I had. He was told that you kept documentation with people you trusted. Off-site. Is that true?" "In general, yes." "Was I one of those people?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not officially. But there's a file," he said. "In a private legal account. Not at Calder Maritime, completely separate. It has instructions that if something happens to me before I've addressed it legally, the account goes to you." He looked at her. "I set it up 4 years ago. I kept updating the address as you moved." She stared at him. "It's money," he said, "not operational documents. Not anything that creates legal risk for you. Just money and a letter." "What does the letter say?" "That I was sorry I didn't find a better way to handle things before you left." He held her gaze. "That whatever you needed to build a life that felt like yours, I wanted you to have the means for it." He paused. "I never intended you to find out. It was just something I needed to have done." She sat in the passenger seat of a stranger's car on Adams Street in the rain and looked at the man who had spent 4 years quietly maintaining a financial safety net for a woman who'd left without saying goodbye, because that was apparently the shape that Vincent Calder's feelings took when he was trying to stay away. "That's insane," she said. "Probably. That is genuinely." She shook her head. "You understand that's an insane thing to do."
"I understand that."
She looked at her building. The light in the second-floor hallway was on, visible through the glass panel beside the front door. The same light that was always on because the bulb was on a timer, and she'd set the timer 2 years ago and never changed it. Ordinary, continuous, entirely unbothered by any of this. "Come up," she said. He looked at her. Not she stopped. "I have things that need to be said in a room where I'm not wearing a hospital gown and dripping on someone else's car seat. Come up." She opened the door. "I'll make coffee. We'll talk. And then you'll go home." He came up. Her apartment was what it was, a one-bedroom on the third floor of a 1920s building that she'd chosen for the original molding and the light and the fact that it was hers and nobody else's, decorated with the careful selectivity of someone who had learned that objects carried weight, and she only wanted weight she'd chosen. Books she'd actually read. A drafting table by the window that she used more than her office desk. Plants that were alive because she paid attention to them. She changed out of the wet clothes in the bedroom while he stood in the kitchen, and she heard him find the coffee without being directed, which meant he'd been in the apartment before she'd suspected this, and had decided not to confirm it, and now confirmed it without having asked. She came out in dry clothes. He handed her coffee. She took it and sat into an armchair by the drafting table, and he sat on the couch across from her, and they were inside now, out of the rain. And the apartment was warm and quiet, and the city made city sounds outside the window. And it was as different from the last 5 days as it was possible to be, and yet the same two people were in the room. "My mother was trying to fix me," she said. That's how she saw it. "She watched me date someone who didn't challenge me and live a life that was too small, and she decided that the problem she needed to fix was that I'd run from something real because I was frightened." She held the coffee cup in both hands. She wasn't entirely wrong about the diagnosis. The method was catastrophically wrong. Yes, she looked at him. She's going to have to live with what nearly happened to Audrey. That's going to be its own punishment for a long time. She paused. "I'm going to be angry at her for a while, and then I'm going to have to decide what I do with it." She paused again. "She's my mother." He nodded. "She also found the one true thing and weaponized it accidentally," Claire said. "She knew I hadn't let go of you, and she tried to use that, and someone used her using it, and people almost got hurt." She looked at the window. "I've been thinking about whether I'm angry at myself for the number. For keeping it, are you?" "No," she said, and it surprised her how certain that was. "I kept it because I wasn't finished. I'm not going to be ashamed of being a person who wasn't finished with something." She looked back at him. "I am going to be honest about what that means going forward." He held her gaze. "What does it mean?" "It means this is a conversation we're actually having. Not an accident, not a crisis response." She set the coffee down. "It means I want to know what you meant in the car about your organization." The longer conversation. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. He was still in the wet jacket. She should have offered him something dry. She registered that and set it aside, and he sat with his elbows on his knees, in the posture of someone who had been carrying a decision for a while and was now locating where it was in his body. "I've been thinking about it for longer than tonight," he said. "Since before the wedding. Since before any of this." He paused. "The organization is structured to be self-sustaining. The legitimate side of Calder Maritime is real. It's been real for 15 years. It generates revenue. It employs people. The other side," he stopped. "The other side has been getting smaller for 3 years because I've been letting it get smaller." He looked up. "Not for you. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't waiting for you to come back, and I wasn't making decisions based on it wasn't for you." "Okay," she said. "It was for me," he said. "Because I'm 41 years old, and I'm tired of the weight of it. I'm tired of what it costs to maintain it. What it costs the people around me." He paused. "What it cost Hartley." She was quiet. "I want to shut it down," he said. "The remaining operations. The arrangements that can be arranged out of. The relationships that can be ended cleanly." He said it the way you say something you've said in your own head many times, and are saying out loud for the first time. "It's not simple. It's not fast. Some of it will take years. But I want it done." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He looked at her directly. "Because you asked about my organization, and I decided I was done not telling you things." He paused. "And because if this, whatever this is, if it's going to be anything, I'm not building it on top of something I'm ashamed of. She looked at him for a long time. I don't want you to do it for me, she said. I need to be clear about that. If you dismantle it, and then it doesn't, if we don't. I know. I need you to do it because you want to. I want to, he said. I've wanted to for 3 years. I need it, he paused. I needed to say it out loud to someone who would tell me honestly whether they believed me. She looked at his face, at the wet jacket and the lines around his eyes that had gotten slightly deeper in 5 years, and the way he was sitting, not the composed, deliberate stillness of the man who had appeared at her sister's wedding like a figure in a film, but the ordinary posture of a tired man at 1:30 in the morning in someone else's apartment, holding something he needed to put down. She believed him, she said. Okay, he repeated, as if confirming the word meant what he thought it meant. I'm not moving to the coast house, she said. I like my apartment. I know, I'm not going to be managed or protected in ways I don't agree to. I know. And when I say I need time, I mean I need time. Not a week. Real time, to figure out who I am in whatever this is. Because the last time I was in it, I didn't know myself well enough and I ran, and that wasn't fair to either of us. Take the time, he said, and you'll wait. He held her gaze. I've been waiting for 5 years. I can be more deliberate about it. She looked at him. She looked at the city out the window. She looked at her drafting table with the plans for the waterfront renovation project spread across it. Client meeting on Monday rescheduled to Wednesday, the work that had continued existing through all of this, indifferent and demanding in hers. Go home, she said. Get some sleep. Call me tomorrow, not early. He stood, picked up his coffee cup and set it on the counter, because he had apparently been raised to do that, which she found unexpectedly humanizing. He put on his wet jacket because it was the only one he had. At the door he stopped. He turned around. The letter, he said. In the account. I meant every word of it. She held his gaze. I know. I would have let you have it, he said. Even if tonight had never happened. Even if you'd never called by accident, and I'd never gone to the wedding. If you'd needed it. I know, Vincent. He nodded once. He left. She listened to his steps go down the hallway, and the building door open and close, and then she went to the window and watched him walk to the car and get in. And the car pulled away from the curb and moved down Adams Street and turned at the end and was gone. She stood at the window for a moment. The rain had mostly stopped. The street was wet and quiet, and the city was doing what the city does at 1:30 in the morning, which is keep going without making too much of it. She went to the drafting table. She sat down. She pulled the waterfront renovation plans toward her and looked at them, the sight lines, the material specifications, the load-bearing considerations she'd been working through for 3 months, and she sat with the ordinary complication of work that needed doing and let it settle around her. She called Audrey at 7 in the morning, which was 1 in the afternoon in Lisbon, and she knew because she'd checked. Audrey answered on the second ring. You missed your midnight check-in, she said immediately. Not accusation, just fact. I know, I'm sorry, it was a long night. A pause. Are you actually all right? Yes, Claire said. Actually, she paused. I have a lot to tell you. I know you do, Audrey said. I've been awake since 5 thinking about it. Another pause. Daniel thinks I'm calling my mother about the thank you note situation. He does not know that I am sitting in a bathroom in a hotel in Lisbon, waiting for my sister to call and tell me what actually happened at my wedding. It started before the wedding, Claire said. I figured. It's complicated. I figured that too. A pause. The kind of pause Audrey used when she was choosing to be patient, which she didn't always choose. You left with him. Yes, the man from the terrace. Yes. And then what happened, Audrey? Claire looked at the window. The morning light was gray and clear after the rain. When are you home? 8 days. I'll come to dinner when you're home. I'll tell you everything, not on the phone. She paused. What I can tell you right now is that it's over. Whatever was happening is over. You were never in any real danger. She paused again. And I'm sorry the wedding was fine, Audrey said. The wedding was actually perfect. What came after the wedding is what I have questions about. A pause. Does he make you happy? Claire was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. That's not a no. No, she said. It's not a no. Audrey was quiet for a moment in her hotel bathroom in Lisbon. "Come to dinner," she said. "Bring food. Daniel makes a terrible host when he's jet-lagged, and I'll need some to talk to who actually engages." "I'll bring food," Claire said. And Claire, a pause. "Whatever happened, I'm glad you didn't just get in an Uber." She almost laughed. "I'm starting to think I'm glad too." She hung up, sat with the phone in her hand. Sandra Assad Okafor was 53, and arrived at Claire's apartment at 8:15 with a leather bag and the manner of someone who billed by the hour and respected your time because it was adjacent to hers. She was not warm exactly, but she was clear, which Claire found more useful than warm. They spent 3 hours at the kitchen table. Sandra had the federal evidence file, or enough of it to work from, and she walked Claire through exactly what cooperating witnesses were expected to provide, and exactly where the lines were, and what would and wouldn't be asked. A sound answered. Claire answered every question directly, and Sandra made notes and occasionally pushed back, and Claire pushed back on the pushback. And by the end of it, Sandra looked at her with the expression of someone who had formed a professional opinion. "You'll be fine in the room," Sandra said. "I know," Claire said. Sandra almost smiled. "Yes," she said, "I can see that." The federal interview happened Thursday. A conference room in the federal building, downtown, with 2 investigators who were professional and thorough and asked good questions. Sandra was beside her. Claire answered everything they needed, in the order they needed it, with the specificity they needed. She told them about the bar meeting with Evan and the Harrow building and Vescari and what had been said and in what order. She told them about her mother's role not protecting Patricia, because protecting Patricia would have meant lying. And she was done with the particular damage that protecting people from consequences caused. She told them with the flat, clear language of someone who had processed it enough to report it accurately. They didn't ask about Vincent's organization. Sandra had told her they wouldn't, because Vincent's organization was not the subject of their investigation. Their investigation was Vescari, and Vescari was comprehensively handled, and they had more than enough. She walked out of the federal building into a cold Thursday afternoon in October and stood on the steps and breathed the air, which was clean in the way. Air is clean after extended rain. Done, she thought. She took the tea home. Evan accepted a cooperation agreement 3 weeks later. Braddock told her, not Vincent. Braddock called her directly, which she appreciated, because it meant the information was being passed as information and not as a report delivered through an intermediary to manage her reaction. The Vescari organization's assets were frozen. Vescari's legal team was working through a situation that his legal team would be working through for a long time. 3 lieutenants had already agreed to cooperate. The waterfront operations from Providence to Portland were effectively dismantled. Evan had provided, per Braddock, comprehensive financial documentation, recorded communications, and the full history of his role in the operation, going back 4 years. His cooperation agreement would keep him out of prison. His life would be permanently altered in the specific way that lives are altered, when you spend 4 years as something other than what you claimed to be, and then spend the rest of your time as the person who provided testimony about it. She thought about him once, specifically on a Sunday morning in November, when she was drinking coffee at the drafting table and the light was coming in clean from the west. She thought about the green jacket and the way he'd said, not the part about what I was supposed to be finding out. She thought about the fact that some portion of it had been real and that the real portion had not been enough to make a different decision, and that this was its own kind of tragedy, not hers, exactly, but not entirely his either. She set the thought down. She went back to work. Her mother came to Boston in November. Patricia Hallowell arrived at Claire's apartment on a Saturday, unannounced except for the text she'd sent the night before that said simply, "I'd like to come tomorrow, if that's all right." Claire had said yes, because the alternative, more time, more distance, was just more of the same management she was trying to stop doing. She looked older. Not dramatically, she was still exactly herself, still the precise and beautiful woman who had run Claire's childhood with the efficiency of someone who believed deeply in the value of well-managed environments. But there was something in her face that had changed. Since the last time Claire had seen her at the wedding, a line around the mouth that was new or newly visible. Something in the eyes that had seen itself clearly, and not entirely liked what it found. She came in, she sat. Claire made tea she didn't particularly want. They sat at the kitchen table, and Patricia put both hands around the cup and looked at the table for a moment, which was as close to composure failure as Claire had ever seen from her mother, and therefore was significant. "I should have asked you," Patricia said, "about what you needed, about what you wanted, instead of deciding." Claire looked at her. "Yes, I was so certain I knew. I know you were. I've spent 32 years being certain. I knew what was best for you," Patricia said. "I'm not entirely sure I knew even the times I was right." She looked up. "I'm sorry about Audrey. I'm sorry about what happened. I understand that it could have." She stopped. "It didn't," Claire said. "Audrey is fine. She doesn't fully know your role in it, and I've thought about whether to tell her, and I've decided that's your conversation to have with her, not mine." Patricia absorbed that. "That's generous." "It's not generous. It's correct. You made the decision. You should be the one who accounts for it to the people it could have hurt." Claire paused. "But she should know. Eventually, I know." Patricia looked at the tea. "The man who came to the house, who told me he was Vincent's associate. Vascari's people. They found the leverage point, and they pushed on it. They do that. I let them." Her voice was flat. "Yes. Because I wanted to believe that someone else had a solution to the thing I couldn't fix." Patricia looked up. "You were unhappy, Claire. For years. Not always, not obviously. But I could see it." "I know you could," Claire said. "You weren't wrong about that. Was I wrong about him?" She looked at her mother, at the question which was the real one, the one underneath all the rest of it. "I don't know yet," she said, "but you're finding out." "Yes." Patricia looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman reassessing something she thought she'd already mapped completely. "He came to the wedding himself," she said, "when he heard your voice." "Yes. A man like that doesn't do that." "No," Claire said. "He doesn't." Her mother picked up the tea, drank it, set it down, and did something she almost never did, which was sit quietly in a room without filling the silence with management. They sat together in the November morning, and the light came in from the west, and the city went about its Saturday business outside. And it was not easy exactly, not clean, not the kind of resolved that meant finished. But it was a start at something that might eventually become the truth of their relationship rather than the managed version. That was enough for now. She called Vincent on a Sunday in December. Not because something had happened. Not because Braddock had relayed information, or Sandra had an update, or the federal timeline had produced anything requiring attention. She called him on a Sunday in December because she wanted to, and because she'd promised herself she would operate from want rather than management. He answered on the second ring. "How are you?" she said. "Working," he said, "on the Calder Maritime restructuring. The Independent Oversight Committee meets next week." A pause. "It's slower than I thought it would be." "Restructuring always is," she said. "You're changing load-bearing elements. You have to do it in the right order, or the whole thing shifts wrong." A brief silence. "You sound like you know about that." "I build things for a living." "Right." She could hear something in his voice that was not quite warmth, but was the container that warmth lived in. "How are you?" "Good," she said. "Actually good. The waterfront project is going well. I got a second commission off the back of it, a residential build in Cambridge. It's complicated in a way I like." "That sounds right for you." "It does." She paused. "I'm going to Audrey's for dinner next week." "How is she?" "Good. Glad to be home. She asked about you." A pause. "What did you tell her?" "That it was complicated," she said. "And that I was working on it." Another pause. "That's accurate." "I know." She looked at the drafting table. December light, which was low and clear, and came in at an angle that made everything look slightly more deliberate than it was. "I'm going to need more time." "I know." Not she stopped. Started again. "Not from you. From myself. I'm still figuring out who I am in the version of my life that isn't about running from things or running toward them." She paused. "I want to know what I actually want when I'm not in crisis." "That makes sense," he said. "You're remarkably patient for a man who ran a criminal empire." "Former," he said. "Former," she agreed. "How much of it is actually former?" "About 60%, he said. By January, closer to 75. "And by when is it done?" 18 months, he said. Maybe 14 if the structural changes hold. She nodded to herself in the empty apartment. Okay, I'm noting the timeline, she said. Not as a condition, just noting it. She could hear him understanding what she meant, that she was paying attention, that the information mattered, that the distance she was maintaining had a shape and wasn't permanent. I'll call you, he said. When the committee meets, if that's, call me, she said. She hung up. She sat at the drafting table and looked at the Cambridge residential plans, spread in front of her a complicated foundation, a site that didn't cooperate with conventional approaches, a client who wanted something that hadn't been done before and had enough trust in her to let her figure out how. The kind of work she was good at. She picked up her pencil. Spring came late that year, the way it often does on the Massachusetts coast, tentatively, then all at once. So that one Tuesday in April you walk outside and the air has changed from a thing you were enduring into a thing you could actually want. She drove to the coast on a Saturday in May. She went alone in her own car in the morning when the light was still low and the traffic on the coastal road was thin. She had not called ahead. She had not arranged anything. She drove to the glass and stone house above the Atlantic because she wanted to and because want, she had learned over the past 8 months, was a reliable enough compass if you paid attention to it. She parked on the gravel. She walked to the door and knocked. Rosa answered, and Rosa had someone who had been expecting this visit without knowing exactly when it would come, and was not surprised that it had. He's on the waterside, Rosa said. She went through the house, through the room with the round table where she'd read the files in October, through the kitchen, out the glass doors to the granite shelf above the Atlantic. He was standing at the edge, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the water the way she'd seen him look at it before, not with the romanticism that people brought to ocean views, but with the genuine attention of someone for whom the water was a real thing rather than a backdrop. He heard her come out and turned. He looked at her for a moment, the way he'd looked at her on the terrace at the Ashford estate, as if making sure she was real. You didn't call, he said. I know. I might not have been here. I know that too. She walked to the edge of the granite shelf beside him. The Atlantic was spring gray and moving fast. A boat on the horizon, heading south. The air smelled like salt and cold, and the particular sharpness of a coast that doesn't make accommodations. How did the committee meeting go? Well, the restructuring holds. He paused. The federal contracts are being renegotiated under the new oversight structure. Calder Maritime filed as a fully independent entity last month. I saw, she said. I read the filing. He looked at her. You read the filing. I'm an architect, she said. I read structural documents. She looked at the water. It's a clean structure. The oversight model is sound. The liability exposure is properly distributed. A pause. You analyzed it. I wanted to know if it was real. Is it? Yes, she said. It is. They stood at the edge of the cliff, and the Atlantic moved below them, and the spring light came off the water at a low angle and hit everything at once. I spent 8 months figuring out what I want when I'm not in crisis, she said. You asked me once, the night I came back here, why I kept your number. I told you I didn't know, I remember. I know now, she said. I kept it because some part of me understood, even when I was running, that running wasn't the same as being done. That leaving didn't mean finished, that the thing between us was real enough that I didn't get to just... She paused. Delete it. He was looking at her. I kept it because some part of me intended to come back, she said. When I was ready, when I knew myself well enough to not run again. Are you ready, he said. She looked at the water. At the boat on the horizon, at the spring light on the Atlantic that was cold and clear and made everything look like it meant exactly what it was. Not completely, she said, but enough. He turned toward her. She turned toward him. The space between them was 6 inches and 8 months and 5 years, and a phone call, made by accident that had turned out to be the most honest thing she'd done in a long time. And it was all of those things simultaneously, and she was done pretending any of them didn't count. She stepped into the 6 inches. He put his arms around her with the particular care of someone holding something he'd been afraid of losing again. and she felt the solidity of him against the cracked ribs that had healed, and the arm that had healed, and the 5 years that had left marks she'd been learning, slowly, to stop trying to hide. Below them the Atlantic moved, not caring, as always. Not needing to care, because this, whatever this was becoming, didn't need the ocean's permission. It just needed theirs. She stayed.